Nestled in the heart of this idyllic community stood the home of Andrew and Jessica Howard. To their neighbors, the Howards appeared to be the perfect couple, successful, attractive, and deeply in love. Andrew, a financial analyst with a prestigious firm, was known for his sharp mind and quiet demeanor. His tall frame and piercing blue eyes gave him an air of authority that commanded respect from colleagues and neighbors alike. Jessica, a rising star in the local art scene, was the very picture of grace and creativity. Her vibrant paintings adorned the walls of galleries throughout the city, drawing admirers from far and wide. For years, the Howards' life seemed like a fairy tale. They hosted elegant dinner parties, attended community events, and were often seen strolling hand in hand through the neighborhood park. Their home, a stately Victorian with a wraparound porch, was the envy of the community, its perfectly tended rose garden a testament to their seemingly perfect union. As summer faded into autumn, the idyllic facade began to crack. The truth that lay behind the Howards' picture-perfect life would soon shock the quiet community to its very core. Andrew and Jessica Howard's story began long before they met, shaped by experiences that would ultimately set the stage for the horror to come. Andrew Howard's childhood was far from the suburban dream he later cultivated. Born to a single mother in a run-down apartment on the outskirts of the city, young Andrew learned early on that love was a commodity easily lost. His mother, struggling with addiction, cycled through a series of abusive relationships, leaving Andrew to fend for himself more often than not. From an early age, Andrew exhibited signs of obsessive behavior. He would fixate on objects or ideas, unable to let go until he had examined them from every angle. This trait served him well academically, propelling him to the top of his class despite his challenging home life. However, it also manifested in more troubling ways. Andrew became possessive of the few friends he made, reacting with intense jealousy when they spent time with others. As he grew older, Andrew channeled his obsessive nature into his studies, earning a scholarship to a prestigious university. There he reinvented himself, shedding the trappings of his impoverished past and embracing the persona of a sophisticated, ambitious young man. Yet beneath the polished exterior, the scars of his childhood lingered. Jessica Hartley's upbringing stood in stark contrast to Andrew's. Raised in a loving, artistic family, she was encouraged from a young age to explore her creativity. Her parents, both educators, nurtured her talent and supported her dreams. Jessica's childhood home was filled with laughter, music, and the smell of oil paints. As a teenager, Jessica's artistic abilities blossomed. Her unique style, blending vibrant colors with surrealist elements, caught the attention of local gallery owners. By the time she entered college to study fine arts, Jessica was already making a name for herself in the art world. It was at a charity auction that Andrew and Jessica's paths first crossed. Andrew, now a rising star at his financial firm, was immediately captivated by the vivacious artist. Jessica, in turn, was drawn to Andrew's intensity and charm. Their courtship was a whirlwind of passion and romance, with Andrew showering Jessica with lavish gifts and unwavering attention. Within 6 months, Andrew proposed, presenting Jessica with a stunning diamond ring. Swept up in the fairy tale romance, she said yes. Their wedding, held in a picturesque vineyard, was the social event of the season. As they exchanged vows, neither could have imagined the dark turn their love story would take. To the outside world, Andrew and Jessica Howard were a match made in heaven. But as they settled into married life, the cracks in their foundation began to show, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to unimaginable horror. The early years of the Howards' marriage were marked by genuine happiness and mutual adoration. Andrew reveled in his role as Jessica's husband, proudly accompanying her to gallery openings and basking in the reflected glow of her success. Jessica, for her part, found Andrew's devotion intoxicating, feeling truly seen and appreciated for the first time in her life. Their home on Sycamore Lane became a hub of social activity, with the couple hosting lavish dinner parties for their growing circle of friends. Andrew would regale guests with tales of his financial conquests, while Jessica's warmth and charm kept conversation flowing. To all who knew them, the Howards seemed to have it all: success, love, and a bright future ahead. But as months turned into years, subtle shifts began to occur in the dynamics of their relationship. Andrew's natural tendency toward obsession, once focused on his career, now centered entirely on Jessica. He began to monitor her movements, questioning her about her daily activities, and growing increasingly agitated when she spent time away from him. At first, Jessica found Andrew's possessiveness flattering, interpreting it as a sign of his deep love for her. She would laugh off his probing questions, assuring him that he had nothing to worry about. But as his behavior intensified, she started to feel suffocated by his constant need for her attention and presence. Andrew's obsession manifested in increasingly controlling ways. He insisted on driving Jessica to and from her studio, claiming concern for her safety. He began to criticize her choice of clothing, suggesting more modest options that wouldn't attract attention from other men. When Jessica spoke of expanding her artistic reach to galleries in other cities, Andrew reacted with thinly veiled disapproval, citing the importance of focusing on their life together. As Jessica's career continued to flourish, Andrew's insecurity grew. He attended her gallery openings not as a supportive husband, but as a watchful guardian, his eyes constantly scanning the room for potential threats to his relationship. When admirers approached Jessica to discuss her work, Andrew would insert himself into the conversation, his arm wrapped possessively around his wife's waist. At home, Andrew began to subtly undermine Jessica's confidence. He would make offhand comments about the subjective nature of art, questioning whether her success was truly based on talent or merely on fleeting trends. These remarks, delivered with a smile and a kiss, slowly chipped away at Jessica's self-assurance. Jessica, caught up in the whirlwind of her rising fame, initially failed to recognize the full extent of Andrew's changing behavior. She attributed his mood swings and increased clinginess to stress from his job, convincing herself that it was just a phase they would work through together. But as Andrew's obsession deepened, so did the chasm between them. Jessica found herself censoring her conversations, carefully considering her words to avoid triggering Andrew's jealousy or disapproval. She began to withdraw from friends, canceling plans at the last minute to appease her husband's desire for her constant presence. In quiet moments when Andrew was at work and she was alone in her studio, Jessica would stare at her half-finished canvases, feeling the spark of creativity that had once burned so brightly beginning to flicker. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong in her marriage, but the thought of confronting Andrew filled her with a nameless dread. Little did Jessica know that behind Andrew's increasingly erratic behavior lurked a darkness far more sinister than she could have imagined. As his obsession grew, so too did the twisted fantasies that would ultimately lead their love story to its horrifying conclusion. As Andrew's obsession with Jessica intensified, a disturbing new element began to creep into his psyche. Late at night, while Jessica slept peacefully beside him, Andrew would sit bathed in the blue glow of his computer screen, delving into the darkest corners of the internet. What began as idle curiosity soon morphed into a full-blown fixation on the macabre and taboo. Andrew found himself drawn to historical accounts of cannibalism, poring over tales of the Donner Party and ritualistic practices of ancient cultures. He devoured true crime stories about killers who had consumed their victims, his mind racing with a mixture of revulsion and fascination. As the weeks passed, his online searches became more specific, more disturbing. How to prepare human flesh, effects of consuming human meat, legal consequences of cannibalism. In the recesses of his troubled mind, a horrifying fantasy began to take shape. Andrew imagined consuming Jessica, not just metaphorically as he had with his possessive behavior, but literally. The idea of making her a permanent part of himself, of truly possessing her in every way possible, became an all-consuming obsession. During the day, Andrew struggled to maintain his facade of normalcy. He went through the motions at work, his mind constantly drifting to his dark desires. In meetings, he would find himself staring at his colleagues' throats, wondering about the taste and texture of human flesh. These thoughts both thrilled and disgusted him, adding to the turmoil in his fractured psyche. At home, Andrew's behavior became increasingly erratic. He would watch Jessica intently as she moved about the house, his gaze lingering on the curve of her neck, the softness of her skin. During dinner, he would ask strange questions about her diet and exercise routine, framing them as concern for her health, while secretly assessing her quality as potential sustenance. Jessica, unaware of the true nature of Andrew's thoughts, attributed his odd behavior to stress and tried her best to soothe him. She suggested they take a vacation, hoping that time away from work might help Andrew relax, but the idea of being alone with Jessica, away from prying eyes, only fueled Andrew's dark fantasies. As his obsession grew, Andrew began to see signs and omens everywhere, convincing himself that fate was pushing him toward his gruesome goal. A rare steak served at a restaurant became a divine message. A paper cut on Jessica's finger, leaving a drop of blood on her painting, seemed like an invitation. Andrew knew his thoughts were wrong, that they crossed a line no sane person would contemplate. In moments of clarity, he would be overwhelmed with shame and self-loathing. He considered seeking help, even going so far as to research therapists in the area. But the fear of exposure, of losing Jessica and the life he had built, always held him back. Instead, Andrew retreated further into his private world of twisted desires. He began keeping a journal, hidden in a locked drawer in his home office, where he detailed his fantasies in graphic, disturbing prose. As the pages filled, Andrew felt himself slipping further from reality, edging closer to a point of no return. As summer gave way to autumn, the facade of normalcy began to crumble. Jessica, no longer able to ignore the changes in her husband, found herself walking on eggshells in her own home. Andrew's mood swings had become more pronounced, his behavior increasingly unpredictable. One crisp Saturday morning, Jessica was preparing for an important meeting with a prestigious gallery owner from New York. As she applied her makeup, Andrew appeared in the bathroom doorway, his eyes dark with barely contained anger. He demanded to know why she was getting so dressed up, accusing her of trying to attract attention from other men. When Jessica tried to explain the importance of the meeting, Andrew flew into a rage, knocking her carefully arranged portfolio to the floor and scattering sketches across the tile. Shocked and frightened by this outburst, Jessica seriously considered canceling the meeting, but a small voice inside her, one that had been growing louder in recent months, urged her not to give in to Andrew's controlling behavior. With trembling hands, she gathered her sketches and left for the meeting, ignoring Andrew's alternating pleas for forgiveness and muttered threats. The incident marked a turning point in their relationship. Jessica began to notice things she had previously overlooked or dismissed. The way Andrew's gaze would linger on her throat during conversations, a strange glint in his eye that sent shivers down her spine. His insistence on preparing all their meals himself, claiming it was an expression of his love, while questioning every morsel she put in her mouth. Jessica confided in her closest friend, Beatrice, sharing her growing fears about Andrew's behavior. Beatrice urged her to leave, offering her spare room as a safe haven. But Jessica, still clinging to the memory of the man she had fallen in love with, hesitated. She convinced herself that if she could just understand what was troubling Andrew, she could help him return to his old self. Meanwhile, Andrew's professional life was unraveling as rapidly as his personal one. His obsession with Jessica and his dark fantasies left little room for focus on his work. He began making careless errors, missing important deadlines and snapping at colleagues. His once promising career was now hanging by a thread, with whispered conversations and concerned looks following him through the office. During a crucial presentation to the company's biggest client, Andrew's mind wandered to thoughts of Jessica. He found himself describing market trends in terms of consumption and digestion, his words becoming increasingly bizarre and inappropriate. The client shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging worried glances as Andrew's supervisor attempted to salvage the meeting. The following day, Andrew was called into his supervisor's office. He was presented with a choice: take a leave of absence to address his obvious personal issues or face termination. In a moment of clarity, Andrew agreed to the leave, recognizing it as an opportunity to spend more time with Jessica and to finally act on his deepening obsession. As news of Andrew's professional troubles spread through their social circle, the invitations to dinner parties and community events began to dry up. The Howards, once the golden couple, now found themselves increasingly isolated. Jessica, torn between her love for Andrew and her growing fear of him, threw herself into her art. Her paintings, once celebrated for their vibrant colors and joyful themes, took on a darker tone. Critics praised her new work for its raw emotion and haunting imagery, unaware of the turmoil that inspired it. In the quiet of their home, as autumn leaves fell outside their windows, Andrew and Jessica orbited each other like binary stars locked in a decaying dance. The tension between them was palpable, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Neither could have predicted the horrifying form that explosion would take, nor how close they were to the point of no return. With his leave of absence from work, Andrew found himself with an abundance of free time, time he dedicated to nurturing his darkest fantasies. The idea of consuming Jessica, once a fleeting thought, had now become an all-encompassing obsession. In the recesses of his troubled mind, a plan began to take shape. Andrew's first step was to gather the necessary tools. He made a series of purchases, each seemingly innocent on its own, but chilling when viewed as part of a larger scheme. A new set of sharp kitchen knives, ordered online to avoid suspicion. Heavy-duty plastic sheeting, ostensibly for a home improvement project. A large freezer, delivered under the guise of stocking up on food for the winter. As he accumulated his grim collection, Andrew immersed himself in research. He spent hours poring over anatomy textbooks, studying the human body with a detached, clinical interest that belied his true intentions. He researched methods of sedation, weighing the pros and cons of various drugs and techniques. In a notebook hidden beneath a loose floorboard in his study, Andrew meticulously recorded his findings, sketching out plans and contingencies. The technical aspects of his plan occupied much of Andrew's thoughts, but he also grappled with the psychological implications of what he was considering. He tried to rationalize his desires, convincing himself that his act would be one of ultimate love and devotion. In his warped mind, consuming Jessica would ensure that they would be together forever, her essence becoming a permanent part of him. As his plan solidified, Andrew found himself caught in a constant internal struggle. Moments of clarity would break through the fog of his obsession, leaving him horrified at what he was contemplating. In these moments, he would consider confessing everything to Jessica, begging for her help and forgiveness. But the pull of his dark desires was always stronger, dragging him back into the abyss of his twisted fantasy. Andrew began to test the waters, pushing the boundaries of his relationship with Jessica to see how far he could go. He tested trying new exotic foods, watching her reaction closely as he described dishes that skirted the edge of taboo. He initiated conversations about mortality and the nature of existence, probing Jessica's beliefs about the afterlife and the connection between body and soul. Jessica, already on edge from Andrew's erratic behavior, found these conversations deeply unsettling. She noticed a new intensity in his gaze when he looked at her, a hunger that seemed to go beyond mere desire. Though she couldn't put her finger on what exactly was wrong, her instincts screamed that she was in danger. As his plan neared completion, Andrew felt a mix of anticipation and dread. He knew that once he took action, there would be no going back. The life he had built, the facade of normalcy he had maintained for so long, would be shattered forever. But the compulsion to follow through with his dark fantasy had become too strong to resist. In the final days leading up to his planned act, Andrew's behavior became increasingly erratic. He alternated between periods of manic energy, during which he would lavish attention on Jessica, and dark moods where he would retreat into himself, barely acknowledging her presence. The tension in their home reached a fever pitch, with both Andrew and Jessica aware that something monumental was about to occur, though only one of them knew the true nature of what was to come. The morning dawned gray and overcast, matching the somber mood that had settled over the community. Jessica awoke to find Andrew's side of the bed empty, the sheets cold. She found him in the kitchen, meticulously sharpening a set of knives. The sight sent a chill down her spine, though she couldn't articulate why. "Andrew, you startled me," Jessica said, her voice trembling slightly. Andrew looked up, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity. "Everything's perfect, my love," he replied, his voice unnaturally calm. "I'm just preparing for a special dinner tonight. I want everything to be just right." Jessica forced a smile, trying to ignore the knot of fear tightening in her stomach. "That sounds lovely," she said. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Andrew shook his head, returning his attention to the knife in his hand. "No need," he murmured. "I want this to be a surprise. You just relax and enjoy your day." Unable to shake her sense of unease, Jessica retreated to her studio. She tried to lose herself in her painting, but found her hand shaking too much to hold a brush steady. Instead, she sat at her desk, penning a letter to her parents that she had no intention of sending. In it, she poured out her fears about Andrew's behavior, her growing sense that something was terribly wrong in their marriage. Writing the words felt cathartic, even if she knew they would never be read. Meanwhile, Andrew went about his preparations with a methodical precision that belied the madness of his intentions. He lined the basement with plastic sheeting, arranged his tools with care, and prepared the sedatives he planned to use. Each action was accompanied by a running commentary in his head, a twisted logic that justified his plans as acts of love and devotion. As the day wore on, neighbors noticed unusual activity at the Howard house. Beatrice, Jessica's friend who lived across the street, observed Andrew making multiple trips to his car, loading and unloading various items. She considered calling Jessica to check in, but hesitated, not wanting to seem nosy. Another neighbor, elderly Mr. Grayson, was out walking his dog when he heard raised voices coming from inside the Howard home. He paused, straining to make out the words but could only discern the tone. Jessica's voice, high and frightened, followed by Andrew's lower, more menacing rumble. Inside, the confrontation that Mr. Grayson had overheard was reaching a boiling point. Jessica, unable to bear the tension any longer, had confronted Andrew about his behavior. Jessica confronted Andrew, her face streaked with tears as she expressed her confusion and fear over the changes in his behavior and their relationship. She pleaded with him to open up and explain what was happening. Andrew, feeling his carefully laid plan slipping away, struggled to maintain his composure. He responded cryptically, claiming she wouldn't understand and insisting that his actions were for the sake of their love. Sensing the dangerous undercurrent in Andrew's words, Jessica began to retreat. She suggested taking some time apart, proposing to stay with her parents until they could work through their issues. As Jessica turned to leave, Andrew's demeanor suddenly changed. He grabbed her arm forcefully, preventing her departure. His voice took on a menacing tone as he declared that he wouldn't allow her to leave, insisting that they were destined to be together forever. In that moment, looking into her husband's eyes, Jessica saw the full extent of his madness. She realized with a clarity that cut through her fear that she was in mortal danger. As Andrew's grip tightened, Jessica knew that the next few hours would determine not just the fate of her marriage, but her very survival. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the Howards' living room, the situation had reached a critical point. Jessica, her arm bruised from Andrew's grip, stood frozen in place, her mind racing to find a way out of this nightmare. "Andrew, please," she pleaded, struggling to keep her voice calm. "Let's talk about this. Whatever's going on, we can get through it together. We can get help." Andrew's eyes, once filled with love and warmth, now burned with a manic intensity that chilled Jessica to her core. "Don't you see?" he said, his voice eerily calm. "This is the only way we can truly be together. Forever." As he spoke, Andrew began to guide Jessica towards the basement door, his grip on her arm never loosening. Jessica's heart raced, knowing instinctively that if she allowed herself to be taken down those stairs, she might never come back up. In a desperate bid for freedom, Jessica stomped hard on Andrew's foot and twisted out of his grasp. She ran for the front door, her fingers fumbling with the lock as Andrew recovered and lunged towards her. Just as she managed to wrench the door open, Andrew slammed it shut, the bang echoing through the quiet suburban street. Outside, Mr. Grayson, who was returning from his evening walk, heard the commotion and paused. He could hear muffled shouting coming from inside the Howard home, the voices rising in intensity. Concerned, he approached the house, his hand hovering over his phone, ready to call for help. Inside, Jessica found herself cornered in the kitchen. She grabbed a knife from the counter, holding it out in front of her with shaking hands. "Stay back, Andrew," she warned, her voice quavering. "I don't want to hurt you, but I will if I have to." Andrew paused, his eyes fixed on the knife in Jessica's hand. "My love," he said, his tone sickeningly sweet. "You don't understand. This is for us. I'm going to make us one. You'll be a part of me forever." As he spoke, Andrew inched closer, his hand reaching for something in his pocket. Jessica, realizing with horror what he intended, knew she had to act. With a cry of fear and desperation, she lunged forward, the knife slashing across Andrew's outstretched arm. Andrew reeled back, more surprised than hurt, staring at the thin line of blood welling up on his skin. For a moment, the shock seemed to clear his mind. "Jessica," he said, his voice suddenly small and confused. "What's happening?" Jessica, seeing a glimmer of her husband in those confused eyes, felt a surge of hope. "Andrew," she said gently, lowering the knife slightly. "It's okay. We can get through this. Let me help you." But the moment of clarity was fleeting. Andrew's eyes hardened once more, the madness returning in full force. "No," he growled. "It's too late. We've come too far." With surprising speed, Andrew lunged forward, knocking the knife from Jessica's hand. She cried out in pain and fear as he grabbed her, his strength overwhelming her attempts to break free. Andrew began to drag her towards the basement door, Jessica's heels leaving scuff marks on the polished hardwood floor as she fought against him. Outside, Mr. Grayson had heard enough. The sounds of struggle and Jessica's cries for help spurred him into action. He dialed 911, his voice urgent as he reported a domestic disturbance to the dispatcher. Inside the house, Jessica managed to break free once more, running for the stairs in a desperate bid to reach a phone. Andrew pursued her, his face contorted with rage and frustration. As they struggled on the landing, a vase was knocked over, shattering on the floor below. The noise caught the attention of Beatrice, who had been watching the Howard house with growing concern all evening. She saw shadows moving frantically behind the curtains and heard what sounded like a scream. Without hesitation, she too called 911, her voice joining Mr. Grayson's in urging the police to hurry. The sirens began to wail in the distance. Andrew realized his carefully laid plans were crumbling around him. In a last, desperate attempt to fulfill his twisted fantasy, he redoubled his efforts to subdue Jessica. The two grappled at the top of the stairs, teetering dangerously close to the edge. Just as Andrew seemed to gain the upper hand, the sound of screeching tires and car doors slamming echoed from outside. The police had arrived, drawn by the frantic calls of concerned neighbors. As flashlight beams cut through the gathering darkness outside, Andrew and Jessica remained locked in their final desperate struggle, the fate of their tragic love story hanging in the balance. The quiet was shattered by the piercing wail of police sirens as squad cars converged. Officers leapt from their vehicles, hands on their holstered weapons, responding to the urgent calls of a domestic disturbance. Inside the house, Andrew and Jessica froze at the sound of car doors slamming and urgent voices outside. Jessica, seeing her chance for salvation, broke free from Andrew's grip and raced down the stairs screaming for help. Andrew, his mind reeling from the sudden interruption of his plans, hesitated for a crucial moment before giving chase. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, the front door burst open, revealing two police officers with weapons drawn. "Drop to the ground now," one officer shouted, his voice authoritative and firm. Andrew, cornered and desperate, made a final lunge for Jessica. In that instant, several things happened at once. Jessica ducked out of the way, her momentum carrying her towards the safety of the officers. Andrew, overbalancing, stumbled and fell, and the officers, perceiving a threat, moved swiftly to subdue him. In a flurry of motion, Andrew was tackled to the ground, his arms wrenched behind his back as handcuffs were snapped into place. He thrashed and yelled incoherently, all pretense of sanity gone as he watched his twisted fantasy slip away. Jessica, shaking and sobbing, was gently led outside by a female officer. She collapsed into the arms of Beatrice, who had rushed over as soon as the police arrived. Neighbors gathered on the street, watching in shocked silence as the scene unfolded. Andrew, deemed mentally unfit to stand trial, was committed to a high-security psychiatric facility. Doctors struggled to understand the depths of his delusion, the way his love had twisted into something dark and monstrous. His case would become a cautionary tale of obsession, taken to its extreme. The Howard house stood empty, a silent reminder of the tragedy that had almost occurred within its walls. In the picturesque coastal town of Millhaven, where the salty breeze carries whispers of secrets and lies, a tragedy was brewing beneath the surface of everyday life. The quaint streets, lined with colorful boutiques and cozy cafes, masked a web of deceit that would soon unravel, leaving the community shaken to its core. At the heart of this tale are three individuals whose lives became inextricably intertwined. Lachlan Thorne, a man desperate for financial stability and respect. Zara Callahan, a talented chef with dreams bigger than the small town could contain. And Enzo Rossi, the charismatic owner of a popular Italian restaurant. To the outside world, Lachlan and Zara appeared to be the perfect couple, young and in love with a bright future ahead. Their engagement was the talk of the town, a beacon of hope in a place where everyone knew everyone else's business. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming in their relationship, cracks that would soon split wide open. Enzo, with his easy charm and successful business, seemed to have it all. His restaurant was a local institution, and his marriage to Vivian, a respected member of the town council, was envied by many. Yet, behind closed doors, Enzo harbored his own dissatisfactions and desires. As summer faded into autumn, the stage was set for a series of events that would lead to betrayal, blackmail, and ultimately, bloodshed. The story of how these three lives collided is a cautionary tale of passion, greed, and the devastating consequences of keeping secrets in a town where the truth always finds its way to the surface. Lachlan Thorne's story began far from the shores of Millhaven, in a struggling mining town where dreams went to die. The youngest of 4 children, Lachlan grew up watching his father descend into the depths of the earth day after day, only to return home beaten down by the relentless toil. His mother, a part-time seamstress, struggled to keep the family afloat, her fingers constantly pricked by needles as she worked late into the night. From an early age, Lachlan vowed he would escape the cycle of poverty that had trapped his parents. He threw himself into his studies, earning a scholarship to a prestigious university in the city. But the transition from his humble beginnings to the world of academia proved more challenging than he anticipated. Surrounded by wealthy peers who seemed to navigate college life with ease, Lachlan felt like an outsider, constantly battling the feeling that he didn't belong. Despite his best efforts, Lachlan's insecurities began to manifest in self-destructive behaviors. He developed a gambling habit, convinced that one big win could solve all his problems. Instead, it left him deeper in debt, forcing him to take on multiple part-time jobs just to stay afloat. By the time he graduated, the promise of a bright future had dimmed considerably. Lachlan drifted from job to job, never quite finding his footing in the corporate world. His resume became a patchwork of short-term positions and gaps, each failure chipping away at his self-esteem. As his 30th birthday approached, he found himself back in a small town, not unlike the one he had tried so hard to escape. It was in Millhaven that Lachlan's luck seemed to change. He landed a job as a marketing manager for a local brewery, a position that finally allowed him to showcase his skills. More importantly, it was here that he met Zara Callahan. Their whirlwind romance offered Lachlan a glimpse of the life he had always dreamed of. Successful, respected, and loved. When he proposed to Zara after just 6 months of dating, Lachlan truly believed he had finally overcome his past. But old habits die hard, and the pressure to provide Zara with the life he thought she deserved began to weigh heavily on him. As wedding plans progressed, Lachlan found himself once again drawn to the false promise of easy money, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to tragedy. Zara Callahan's journey to Millhaven was paved with both passion and pain. Born to a free-spirited mother and an absent father, Zara spent her childhood bouncing between relatives' homes and short-term apartments. Her mother, Fiona, was a talented artist, but struggled with substance abuse, leaving young Zara to fend for herself more often than not. It was during one of their stays with Zara's maternal grandmother that she discovered her love for cooking. In her grandmother's warm, fragrant kitchen, Zara found solace and stability. She would spend hours watching the elderly woman transform simple ingredients into mouth-watering dishes, soaking up every technique and family recipe like a sponge. As Zara entered her teenage years, her mother's addiction worsened. At 15, Zara made the difficult decision to leave her mother's care, moving in permanently with her grandmother. It was a choice that haunted her, but one that allowed her to focus on her dreams. She threw herself into her culinary pursuits, working part-time at local restaurants while excelling in her high school's home economics classes. Zara's talent didn't go unnoticed. She earned a scholarship to a prestigious culinary school, where she honed her skills and developed her own unique style. Her instructors praised her innovative approach to traditional dishes, and her fellow students admired her dedication and creativity. However, just as Zara was about to graduate, tragedy struck. Her grandmother passed away suddenly, leaving Zara feeling unmoored once again. Grief-stricken and unsure of her next move, she deferred her dreams of working in a big city restaurant and returned to her grandmother's house in Millhaven. It was meant to be temporary, just long enough to settle her grandmother's affairs. But when she heard that the renowned restaurant was hiring, Zara saw an opportunity to gain experience while figuring out her next steps. She impressed Enzo Rossi with her skills and passion, and what was supposed to be a short-term position turned into years. Zara threw herself into her work, quickly rising through the ranks to become the restaurant's sous chef. She found a sense of family among her co-workers and began to put down roots in Millhaven. When she met Lachlan, it seemed like the final piece of her life was falling into place. Little did she know that the stability she had worked so hard to achieve was about to be shattered by a web of desire, deceit, and desperation. The restaurant stood as a testament to Enzo Rossi's unwavering ambition and culinary expertise. The restaurant, with its warm terracotta walls and the intoxicating aroma of authentic Italian cuisine, had been Enzo's dream since he first set foot in Millhaven 20 years ago. A first-generation immigrant, Enzo had arrived with little more than a suitcase full of his nonna's recipes and an unshakable determination to succeed. The early years were a struggle, with Enzo working grueling hours to establish his restaurant's reputation. His charm and culinary skills gradually won over the initially skeptical locals, and the restaurant became the go-to spot for everything from first dates to golden wedding anniversaries. Enzo took pride in knowing his regular customers by name, always ready with a warm smile and a perfectly paired wine recommendation. It was during this period of growing success that Enzo met Vivian, a local girl from a well-respected family. Their whirlwind romance culminated in a lavish wedding that was the talk of Millhaven for months. Vivian, with her sharp business acumen, helped streamline the restaurant's operations, allowing Enzo to focus on what he loved most, creating exquisite dishes in the kitchen. On the surface, Enzo appeared to have it all: a thriving business, a beautiful wife, and the respect of the community. He became a pillar of Millhaven society, sponsoring local events and mentoring aspiring chefs at the high school. His annual charity dinners were legendary, raising substantial funds for various community projects. However, as the years passed, cracks began to appear in Enzo's seemingly perfect life. The long hours at the restaurant took their toll on his marriage. Vivian, now deeply involved in local politics, had less and less time for the romantic gestures that had once characterized their relationship. Their conversations, once filled with dreams and laughter, became focused on business strategies and social obligations. Enzo found himself increasingly restless, yearning for the passion that seemed to have faded from his life. He threw himself into his work, constantly innovating and expanding the restaurant's menu. But even his beloved kitchen began to feel like a gilded cage, trapping him in a life that no longer brought him joy. As he approached his 50th birthday, Enzo felt a growing sense of dissatisfaction. He began to question the choices that had led him to this point, wondering if he had sacrificed too much of himself in pursuit of success. It was in this state of emotional vulnerability that Enzo first began to see Zara as more than just his talented sous chef, setting the stage for a relationship that would have far-reaching and ultimately tragic consequences. The spark between Enzo and Zara ignited on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening in late autumn. The restaurant was uncharacteristically quiet, with only a handful of patrons braving the stormy weather. As closing time approached, Enzo found himself alone in the kitchen with Zara, both of them working in comfortable silence to prepare for the next day. It was Zara who broke the quiet, suggesting a new twist on one of the restaurant's classic dishes. Enzo, intrigued, invited her to demonstrate. As they worked side by side, chopping herbs and sautéing vegetables, Enzo was struck by Zara's passion and creativity. Her eyes lit up as she explained her ideas, and Enzo found himself drawn in not just by her culinary skills, but by her vibrant energy. As they tasted the finished dish together, their eyes met over the steaming plate. In that moment, something shifted between them. Enzo, caught off guard by the intensity of his feelings, made a casual comment about the late hour and suggested they call it a night. But as Zara gathered her things to leave, a clap of thunder startled her, causing her to drop her bag. Enzo rushed to help, and as they both reached for the scattered contents, their hands touched. The physical contact, brief as it was, sent a jolt through both of them. Before either could fully process what was happening, they found themselves in each other's arms, sharing a passionate kiss that left them both breathless and confused. In the days that followed, Enzo and Zara tried to maintain a professional distance, but the tension between them was palpable. Stolen glances across the kitchen, lingering touches as they passed each other in the narrow hallways. It was only a matter of time before they gave in to their desires. Their first real encounter happened after hours in Enzo's office. What started as a discussion about the next season's menu quickly evolved into a heated expression of their pent-up passion. As they lay tangled together on the small leather sofa, both Enzo and Zara knew they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. For Zara, the affair was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The exhilaration of being with Enzo was constantly at war with her guilt over betraying Lachlan. She told herself it was just a physical thing, that her feelings for her fiancé remained unchanged. But as the weeks passed, she found herself increasingly drawn to Enzo, not just physically but emotionally as well. Enzo, for his part, felt rejuvenated by the relationship. With Zara, he rediscovered the passion he had been missing both in and out of the kitchen. He convinced himself that he deserved this happiness, that the years of dedication to his wife and his business entitled him to this secret indulgence. As summer turned to fall, their affair deepened, becoming more than just stolen moments of physical intimacy. Neither Enzo nor Zara were prepared for the storm that was brewing, threatening to destroy everything they had built. Lachlan Thorne prided himself on his ability to read people, a skill honed through years of navigating the corporate world. So when Zara's behavior began to change subtly, he noticed. It started with small things. She was working later hours, seemed distracted during their time together, and was constantly checking her phone. At first, Lachlan attributed it to the stress of wedding planning and her increased responsibilities at the restaurant. But as the weeks passed, a nagging suspicion began to take root in his mind. One evening, as they sat on opposite ends of the couch, ostensibly watching a movie together, Lachlan observed Zara smiling at her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she typed out a message. When he casually asked who she was texting, Zara's response was too quick, too rehearsed. "A coworker?" she said, discussing a new recipe. But the flush on her cheeks and the way she quickly locked her phone told a different story. Determined to uncover the truth, Lachlan began to pay closer attention to Zara's schedule and movements. He noted the nights she came home particularly late, the weekends she claimed to be doing inventory at the restaurant. He even drove by the restaurant a few times, noting with growing unease that Zara's car was often the only one in the parking lot, besides Enzo's distinctive vintage Alfa Romeo. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place on a crisp, autumn evening. Lachlan, unable to shake his suspicions, decided to surprise Zara at work. As he approached the restaurant, he saw two figures silhouetted in the dim light of the kitchen. Through the window, he watched in stunned silence as Enzo pulled Zara close, their lips meeting in a passionate kiss. The sight hit Lachlan like a physical blow. He stumbled back to his car, his mind reeling. All the little inconsistencies, the late nights, the distracted behavior. It all made sense now. The woman he loved, the woman he had planned to spend his life with, was having an affair with her boss. As he sat in his car watching the restaurant, a toxic mixture of emotions coursed through him. Hurt, betrayal, anger, but also surprisingly a cold calculation. Lachlan had always prided himself on his ability to turn situations to his advantage, and as the initial shock wore off, his mind began to work. He thought about the upcoming wedding, the deposits they had already paid. He thought about the shame of calling it off, of admitting to friends and family that he had been deceived. And then he thought about the restaurant, about Enzo's wealth and success. A plan began to form in Lachlan's mind. If Zara thought she could betray him and get away with it, she was sorely mistaken. He would make her pay, quite literally, and in doing so, he would secure the financial stability he had always craved. As he started his car and drove away from the restaurant, Lachlan's hurt and betrayal hardened into resolve. Zara's infidelity would be her downfall, and his ticket to the life he deserved. Lachlan bided his time, carefully planning his next move. He needed irrefutable evidence before confronting Zara. Over the next week, he meticulously documented her comings and goings, even going so far as to plant a small voice-activated recorder in her car. It was an invasion of privacy that made him feel dirty, but he justified it as necessary, given the circumstances. When he finally had what he needed, a recording of Zara and Enzo in an intimate conversation that left no doubt about their relationship, Lachlan set his plan in motion. He chose a quiet Sunday morning, when Zara was relaxed and off guard, to spring his trap. "Lachlan, I know about you and Enzo," he said without preamble as Zara sipped her coffee. The mug slipped from her fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor. Her face, drained of color, told him everything he needed to know. What followed was a conversation filled with tears, recriminations, and desperate pleas. Zara begged for forgiveness, swearing that the affair meant nothing, that Lachlan was the one she truly loved. But Lachlan had steeled himself against her explanations. He laid out his terms coldly. If she wanted to keep their engagement intact and avoid the scandal of her affair being exposed, She would have to do exactly as he said. His demands were simple yet devastating. Zara would use her position at the restaurant to embezzle money, skimming from the daily takings and manipulating the books to cover her tracks. The amount would start small but increase over time. Lachlan framed it as restitution, compensation for the hurt and humiliation she had caused him. Zara, caught between her guilt and her fear of losing everything, reluctantly agreed. She rationalized that it would be temporary, that she could find a way out of this situation without anyone getting hurt. But deep down, she knew she had set foot on a dangerous path. The scheme began slowly. Zara, leveraging her trusted position and her access to the restaurant's financial systems, started by pocketing small amounts from the cash register, no more than $50 at a time. She meticulously altered the daily reports, adjusting inventory numbers and falsifying receipts to cover her tracks. Each time she handed the stolen money to Lachlan, she felt a piece of her soul crumble away. Lachlan, for his part, treated the whole affair with a chilling detachment. He set up a separate bank account to deposit the stolen funds, careful to keep the transactions below amounts that might trigger suspicion. To the outside world, he played the role of the doting fiancé, but in private, he was cold and demanding, constantly pressing Zara for more. As weeks turned into months, the amounts grew larger. Lachlan's appetite for money seemed insatiable, and Zara found herself taking greater risks to meet his demands. She began to manipulate the payroll, creating ghost employees and diverting their salaries. She falsified supplier invoices, pocketing the difference between the actual and inflated costs. The stress of maintaining the deception took its toll on Zara. She lost weight, dark circles forming under her eyes from sleepless nights spent agonizing over her actions. Her once bubbly personality became subdued, her passion for cooking diminishing, as the kitchen she once loved became a constant reminder of her betrayal. Lachlan, however, thrived. The influx of cash allowed him to pay off his gambling debts and even start making risky investments in the stock market. He began to dress better, drive a newer car, and talk about purchasing a house, all under the guise of planning for their future together. As the wedding date approached, Zara found herself trapped in a nightmare of her own making. The thought of marrying Lachlan filled her with dread, but she saw no way out. She had committed crimes, betrayed not only her fiancé but also Enzo and the restaurant that had given her a chance. The weight of her actions pressed down on her, making each day a struggle to maintain the facade of normality. Little did Zara know that her carefully constructed house of cards was about to come tumbling down. Enzo, sharp-eyed and attentive to his business, had begun to notice discrepancies in the books. The confrontation that was brewing would set in motion a chain of events that would change all their lives forever. Enzo Rossi had built his restaurant empire on attention to detail, and it was this meticulous nature that first alerted him to the problem. Small inconsistencies in the daily reports, slight discrepancies in the inventory. Individually, they were easy to overlook, but collectively, they painted a troubling picture. At first, Enzo attributed the errors to simple mistakes or software glitches. He spent long nights poring over spreadsheets, trying to reconcile the numbers. But as the discrepancies continued to mount, a sinking feeling settled in his stomach. Someone was stealing from him, and given the nature of the manipulations, it had to be someone with intimate knowledge of the restaurant's operations. His suspicions inevitably turned to Zara. She had access to all the systems, and the changes had begun around the time their affair started. The thought that she might be betraying him professionally as well as personally was almost too much to bear. Enzo chose a quiet afternoon to confront Zara, calling her into his office under the pretense of discussing a new menu. As soon as the door closed behind her, the facade dropped. He laid out the evidence he had gathered, watching her face carefully for any reaction. Zara's world seemed to crumble around her. Caught between her loyalty to Enzo and her fear of Lachlan, she broke down, confessing everything through a flood of tears. She told Enzo about Lachlan's discovery of their affair, the blackmail, and the escalating demands for money. Enzo listened in stunned silence, a maelstrom of emotions raging within him. Anger at the betrayal warred with concern for Zara, and fear for his own reputation. The revelation of the theft was bad enough, but if word of their affair got out, it would destroy not only his marriage, but also the carefully cultivated image he had built in the community. In the end, self-preservation won out. Enzo made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. He wouldn't go to the police. The risk of exposure was too great. Instead, he would handle this internally. He demanded that Zara end things with Lachlan immediately and return every cent that had been stolen. In return, he would keep quiet about her crimes. What Enzo didn't realize was that his decision to keep the police out of it would set in motion a dangerous chain of events. Lachlan, already teetering on the edge of desperation, would not take kindly to having his source of money cut off. And Zara, caught between two men and her own guilt, was a ticking time bomb of emotions. As Zara left Enzo's office, both of them believed they had found a solution. In reality, they had merely set the stage for a confrontation that would end in tragedy. In the days following her confrontation with Enzo, Zara felt as if she were walking on a tightrope, constantly on the verge of losing her balance. She knew she had to end things with Lachlan, but the thought filled her with dread. Lachlan had already shown how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted, and she feared his reaction to being cut off. Lachlan, oblivious to the shift in dynamics, continued to press Zara for more money. His demands had become increasingly erratic. Fueled by early success in his stock market gambles, he talked of quitting his job, of investing full-time, painting pictures of a lavish future that made Zara's stomach churn with anxiety. When Zara finally gathered the courage to confront Lachlan, the conversation quickly spiraled out of control. She told him about Enzo's discovery, her voice shaking as she explained that there would be no more money. Lachlan's reaction was explosive. He raged at her, accusing her of choosing Enzo over him, threatening to expose their affair and her theft to the entire town. In a moment of desperation, Zara blurted out that Enzo already knew about the affair, that he had chosen to keep it quiet to protect his own reputation. It was the wrong thing to say. Lachlan's anger transformed into a cold, calculating fury. If Enzo was willing to cover up the theft to hide the affair, Lachlan reasoned, then perhaps there was still a way to profit from the situation. Over the next few days, Lachlan began to formulate a new plan. He started showing up at the restaurant during busy hours, making vague comments within earshot of staff and customers. He sent anonymous letters to Vivian, hinting at her husband's infidelity without providing concrete details. Each move was designed to ratchet up the pressure on Enzo, to push him towards a breaking point. Zara watched this unfolding disaster with a sense of helpless dread. She tried to warn Enzo, but he was already retreating into himself, becoming paranoid and short-tempered. The once bustling kitchen of the restaurant became a pressure cooker of tension, with staff picking up on the strained atmosphere between Enzo and Zara. As Lachlan's actions became bolder, Enzo's grip on the situation began to slip. He started drinking heavily, making careless mistakes in the kitchen. Vivian, picking up on the whispers and her husband's strange behavior, became increasingly suspicious and confrontational. The carefully constructed lives of all involved were unraveling at an alarming rate. It was clear that something had to give, but no one could have predicted the violent culmination that was about to unfold in the very place where it all began, the kitchen of the restaurant. Tonight that changed everything started like any other at the restaurant. The dining room hummed with the chatter of patrons, the clink of cutlery against fine china, and the soft strains of Italian music. But in the kitchen, the atmosphere was charged with an almost palpable tension. Enzo had been drinking since the afternoon, his movements becoming increasingly erratic as he barked orders at his staff. Zara worked silently at her station, her eyes constantly darting to the door, dreading Lachlan's now nightly appearance to taunt them. It was just past 9 when Lachlan pushed through the kitchen doors, his face flushed with a dangerous combination of alcohol and bravado. "Enzo, you and I need to have a chat," he announced loudly, causing several of the kitchen staff to pause in their work. Enzo, his patience already worn thin, gestured sharply for Lachlan to follow him into the small office adjacent to the kitchen. Zara, her heart pounding, trailed after them, determined to prevent the confrontation she had been fearing. The next few minutes were a blur of shouting and accusations. Lachlan, emboldened by drink, laid out his demands, a substantial sum of money in exchange for his silence. Enzo, equally inebriated, refused, his face purpling with rage as he yelled at Lachlan to get out of his restaurant. Zara tried to intervene, pleading with both men to calm down, to think rationally. But her words fell on deaf ears. The situation escalated rapidly, with Lachlan grabbing a knife from a nearby prep table, and Enzo lunging for the gun he kept hidden in his desk drawer for emergencies. What happened next would be debated in the courts for months to come. In the chaos of the moment, with Zara screaming for them to stop, a shot rang out. The bullet, whether by intent or accident, struck Lachlan in the chest. He staggered backward, a look of shock on his face before crumpling to the floor. The kitchen erupted into pandemonium. Staff members rushed in, drawn by the sound of the gunshot. Someone called for an ambulance, while others tried to stem the flow of blood from Lachlan's wound. Enzo stood frozen, the gun still in his hand, as the full impact of what had just occurred washed over him. Zara, in a state of shock, found herself mechanically reciting the events to the police officers who arrived on the scene. She watched as Lachlan was stretchered out, his fate uncertain, and as Enzo was led away in handcuffs, still protesting that it had been self-defense. As the adrenaline of the moment faded, the weight of her role in the tragedy began to sink in. Her affair with Enzo, her agreement to Lachlan's blackmail scheme, her failure to come clean earlier, all of it had led to this moment. The life she had carefully built in Millhaven lay in ruins around her, and she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The shot fired in the kitchen of the restaurant that night echoed far beyond its walls, setting in motion a series of events that would captivate and horrify the small coastal town for years to come. In the days following the shooting, Millhaven found itself thrust into an unwelcome spotlight. News vans lined the streets, reporters eager for any morsel of information about the tragedy that had unfolded in the town's beloved Italian restaurant. The investigation moved quickly, with detectives piecing together the complex web of relationships and motivations that had led to that fateful night. Zara, racked with guilt and exhaustion, provided a full confession, detailing the affair, the blackmail, and the theft. Her cooperation proved crucial in unraveling the full extent of the situation. Lachlan, having survived the initial shooting, clung to life in the intensive care unit of Millhaven General Hospital. As he recovered, he too began to talk, his version of events largely corroborating Zara's account, though colored by his own perspective of victimhood. Enzo, initially held on attempted murder charges, maintained his claim of self-defense. The discovery of the knife near where Lachlan had fallen lent some credence to his story, but the circumstances surrounding the confrontation complicated matters. As the details of the case became public, the town reeled from the revelations. The image of the restaurant as a charming family restaurant was shattered, replaced by lurid tales of adultery and financial crimes. Vivian, devastated by her husband's infidelity and the public humiliation, filed for divorce and resigned from her position on the town council. The employees of the restaurant found themselves suddenly out of work, as the restaurant was closed indefinitely, its future uncertain. Many in the town felt betrayed, their trust in people they had considered pillars of the community irreparably damaged. As the case moved towards trial, plea negotiations began behind the scenes. Prosecutors, aware of the complexities of the case and the potential for a lengthy, sensational trial, were open to deals that would avoid a public spectacle. Zara, advised by her lawyer and hoping to avoid a harsh sentence, agreed to testify against both Lachlan and Enzo in exchange for leniency. Lachlan, facing charges of extortion and conspiracy, sought a similar arrangement, eager to paint himself as a victim of circumstance rather than an instigator. Enzo, however, remained adamant about his innocence, insisting on his right to a trial. His defense team began to construct a narrative of a hard-working businessman driven to desperate measures by threats and blackmail. As the legal machinery ground forward, the residents of Millhaven were left to grapple with the aftermath of the tragedy. Trust had been broken, reputations shattered, and the very fabric of the community tested. The true cost of the events at the restaurant, it seemed, would be paid not just by those directly involved, but by the entire town. The jury, while sympathetic to the pressures he had faced, couldn't overlook the fact that he had escalated the confrontation by producing a gun. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5. Zara Callahan, in exchange for her testimony and full cooperation, received a suspended sentence and probation for her role in the embezzlement scheme. The judge, taking into account her remorse and the coercion she had faced, opted for leniency. However, her career in the culinary world was effectively over, her reputation irreparably tarnished. Lachlan Thorne, who survived the shooting but was left with permanent injuries, pleaded guilty to extortion and blackmail charges. He received a 5-year prison sentence, with the judge noting the calculated nature of his actions and the devastating consequences they had wrought. The restaurant never reopened its doors. The building stood empty for years, a stark reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. Randall Mamet, a successful businessman, his wife Sydney, a dedicated homemaker, and Sydney's daughter from a previous marriage, Celeste, lived in a sprawling house. Their neighbors saw them as the perfect family, affluent, attractive, and seemingly happy. But beneath the polished exterior of manicured lawns and dinner parties, a sinister undercurrent was about to pull the Mamets into a vortex of forbidden desire, betrayal, and ultimately, violence. What began as a typical case of marital discontent would spiral into a shocking tale of taboo romance between stepfather and stepdaughter, culminating in a confrontation that ended in twisted death and others' lives shattered beyond repair. Randall and Sydney Mamet's romance began like many others, with a chance encounter at a charity gala in Philadelphia in the spring of 2010. Randall, then 35, was a rising star in the world of finance, known for his sharp mind and charismatic personality. Sydney, 32 at the time, was a divorcee with a young daughter, working as an interior designer for wealthy clients. Their whirlwind courtship captivated their social circle. Randall was smitten by Sydney's elegance and wit, while Sydney saw in Randall the stability and success she craved after her tumultuous first marriage. Within 6 months, Randall had proposed, presenting Sydney with a dazzling diamond ring that became the envy of their friends. The wedding, held at the prestigious Rittenhouse Hotel, was the social event of the season. Sydney's 7-year-old daughter, Celeste, served as the flower girl, her cherubic face beaming as she watched her mother marry the man who would become her stepfather. For the first few years, the Mamets seemed to thrive. Randall's career continued to soar, and he was soon made partner at his firm. Sydney threw herself into the role of the perfect corporate wife, hosting dinner parties and charity events that cemented their status in elite circles. She doted on Celeste, ensuring the girl wanted for nothing, from the best schools to extravagant vacations. But as the novelty of their new life together wore off, cracks began to appear in the foundation of their marriage. Randall's long hours at the office and frequent business trips left Sydney feeling neglected. She had given up her career to support his, and now found herself increasingly isolated in their large, empty house. Sydney's attempts to rekindle the romance were met with indifference from Randall, who seemed more interested in his spreadsheets than his wife. Their conversations, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, became terse exchanges about household matters and Celeste's school schedule. By the time Celeste entered high school, the Mamets' marriage existed mostly for show. They slept in separate bedrooms, citing Randall's snoring as the reason to curious friends. Their interactions were cordial but cold, like business partners rather than loving spouses. Sydney threw herself into volunteer work and her role as Celeste's mother, living vicariously through her daughter's achievements and social life. Randall buried himself deeper in his work, taking on more responsibilities at the firm and spending even less time at home. Neither was willing to admit defeat and file for divorce. Their shared fear of scandal, the comfort of their lifestyle, and concern for how it would affect Celeste kept them trapped in their loveless union. Little did they know that their carefully maintained facade was about to crumble in the most unexpected and tragic way. As Celeste blossomed from a precocious child into a striking young woman, the dynamics in the Mamet household began to shift. Now 18 and preparing for college, Celeste had inherited her mother's grace and her biological father's vivacious spirit. Celeste's relationship with her mother had always been close, if sometimes strained by Sydney's tendency to overprotect and live through her daughter's experiences. With Randall, however, things had been more complicated. In the early years of the marriage, he had been a doting stepfather, attending her recitals and helping with homework. But as his marriage to Sydney cooled, so did his interactions with Celeste. That changed during Celeste's senior year of high school. Randall, perhaps feeling the weight of his own mortality as he approached 50, began to take a renewed interest in his stepdaughter's life. He attended her dance performances, beaming with pride from the audience. He engaged her in conversations about her college plans, offering advice on majors and career paths. Sydney, at first, was pleased to see Randall finally acting like part of the family again. She encouraged the father-daughter bonding, hoping it might somehow bridge the gulf in their marriage. But as the months wore on, she began to sense something unsettling in the way Randall looked at Celeste, in the way their conversations would stop abruptly when she entered a room. Celeste, for her part, found herself drawn to Randall in a way that both excited and confused her. His attention made her feel seen in a way she hadn't before. She began to dress more carefully when she knew he'd be home, to seek out his company under the guise of needing help with college applications or financial advice. The tension in the house grew palpable. Family dinners became a minefield of loaded glances and double entendres. Sydney watched with growing unease as her daughter and husband orbited each other, their gravitational pull seeming to exclude her entirely. As Celeste's high school graduation approached, the Mammoth house was a powder keg of unspoken desires and simmering resentments. None of them could have predicted the explosion that was to come, or the devastating aftermath that would follow. The line between appropriate stepfather-stepdaughter affection and something more sinister was crossed on a rainy night in April, just weeks before Celeste's graduation. Sydney was out of town for a charity event, leaving Randall and Celeste alone in the house. They had settled in to watch a movie, a bottle of wine between them. Randall reasoning that at 18 Celeste was old enough for a glass or two under parental supervision. As the wine flowed and the storm raged outside, their inhibitions lowered. Celeste, emboldened by alcohol and the charged atmosphere, confessed to Randall that she had always found him attractive. Randall, his judgment clouded and his loneliness overwhelming, responded not with the fatherly dismissal he should have, but with a confession of his own growing feelings. One touch led to another, and soon they found themselves entangled on the couch, years of suppressed attraction exploding into a passionate encounter. The next morning brought with it shame, confusion, and the thrill of forbidden fruit tasted. Both Randall and Celeste swore it would never happen again, that it was a mistake born of loneliness and wine. But the dam had broken, and the flood of desire was not so easily contained. Stolen glances became stolen kisses, furtive touches beneath the dinner table, coded text messages arranging clandestine meetings. They justified their actions to themselves and each other. Randall wasn't Celeste's real father, they reasoned. Sydney had been cold and distant for years. They were both consenting adults. Love, they told each other, couldn't be wrong. But the guilt gnawed at them, particularly Celeste. She saw the pain in her mother's eyes, the growing suspicion. She knew the devastating impact this would have if discovered, yet she couldn't bring herself to end it, addicted to the rush of their forbidden romance. Randall compartmentalized, as he did with all aspects of his life. When with Sydney, he played the role of distant but dutiful husband. With his colleagues, he was the consummate professional. But in those secret moments with Celeste, he allowed himself to feel a passion he thought he had lost forever. Their trysts became more frequent and daring as the weeks passed. A rendezvous at a motel on the outskirts of town, under the guise of college tours. Heated encounters in Randall's car, parked in secluded spots. Each time they swore it would be the last. Each time they found themselves drawn back together, powerless against the pull of their illicit desire. But as spring turned to summer, the web of lies they had woven began to tangle, threatening to ensnare them all. As Celeste's freshman year of college approached, the affair between her and Randall intensified. The impending separation seemed to fuel their passion, each encounter tinged with a desperate urgency. They began taking greater risks, their need for each other overriding their caution. Randall started finding excuses to visit Celeste at her college campus, a mere 2-hour drive away. He would claim business meetings in the area, when in reality he was spending long, luxurious afternoons tangled in the sheets of Celeste's dorm room. Celeste, for her part, would invent study groups and extracurricular activities to explain her frequent trips home on weekends. Their behavior began to impact their relationships with others. Randall grew even more distant from Sydney, barely able to look at her without feeling a stab of guilt. He threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, using it as both an escape and an excuse for his absences. Celeste struggled to connect with her college peers, always holding back, always guarding her explosive secret. The affair also began to change them as individuals. Randall, reinvigorated by his relationship with Celeste, started paying more attention to his appearance. He joined a gym, updated his wardrobe, even contemplated hair restoration treatments. His colleagues remarked on his newfound energy, assuming he had finally found work-life balance. Celeste, meanwhile, found herself torn between exhilaration and shame. She excelled in her studies, channeling her turbulent emotions into her coursework, but her social life suffered. She rebuffed advances from classmates, unable to contemplate a normal relationship while entangled with her stepfather. There were close calls that should have served as wake-up calls. Once, Sydney nearly walked in on them in a compromising position in the pool house. saved only by a well-timed phone call that delayed her arrival home. Another time, one of Celeste's dorm mates spotted Randall leaving her room early in the morning, leading to awkward questions that Celeste clumsily deflected. Despite these near misses, Randall and Celeste convinced themselves they could maintain their secret indefinitely. They began making tentative plans for a future together, whispering about the day when they could finally be open about their love. Randall spoke of divorcing Sydney, of starting a new life with Celeste once she finished college. Celeste daydreamed about a fairy tale wedding, conveniently ignoring the devastation it would wreak on her mother. But as their fantasy future grew more elaborate, so did the tangled web of lies required to sustain their present. Randall's finances came under scrutiny at home as Sydney questioned the increased business expenses and mysterious cash withdrawals. Celeste's academic performance, while still strong, began to slip as the stress of her double life took its toll. The pressure began to mount, the cracks in their carefully constructed facade widening day by day. Still they persisted, each stolen moment together reinforcing their belief that their love was worth any cost. They failed to see that the price would be far higher than either of them could have imagined, and that the bill was coming due far sooner than they knew. It was during a lunch with her friend Beatrice that the first inkling of the terrible truth began to form in Sydney's mind. Beatrice, ever the gossip, mentioned offhandedly that she'd seen Randall and Celeste having an intense conversation at a cafe in town, at a time when Celeste was supposed to be at college and Randall at work. The way Beatrice described their body language, leaning in close, hands touching on the table, sent a chill down Sydney's spine. She brushed it off, laughing too loudly and changing the subject, but the seed of suspicion had been planted. From that moment on, Sydney began to pay closer attention to the interactions between her husband and daughter. She noticed the lingering glances, the inside jokes she wasn't privy to, the way they always seemed to find reasons to be alone together. As the evidence mounted, Sydney found herself trapped in a state of denial. The alternative was too horrible to contemplate, but with each passing day, the truth she didn't want to face inched closer to the surface, threatening to explode into the open and shatter their lives forever. The day Sydney's world imploded started like any other. It was a warm June morning, the air heavy with the promise of summer storms. Sydney had plans to meet friends for lunch, but a last-minute cancellation left her with an unexpected free afternoon. On a whim, she decided to surprise Randall at his office, perhaps suggest an impromptu date night to rekindle their faltering connection. But Randall wasn't in his office. His assistant, flustered by Sydney's unexpected appearance, let slip that Mr. Mamet had left early, mentioning something about a family emergency. Sydney felt her blood run cold. There was no family emergency she knew of. With trembling hands, she took out her phone and opened the tracking app she'd installed weeks ago in a moment of paranoid weakness. The pulsing dot of Randall's location appeared not at home, not at any hospital, but at a nondescript address on the outskirts of town. The drive to that address was a blur. Sydney moved on autopilot, her mind racing through possibilities, each more devastating than the last. She pulled up to a small motel, the kind that rented rooms by the hour, and there in the parking lot was Randall's car. Sydney sat in her vehicle, paralyzed with indecision. Did she really want to know? Couldn't she just drive away, pretend she'd never seen this? But then another car pulled into the lot, Celeste's beat-up college Honda. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Sydney watched her daughter hurry across the parking lot and knock on one of the motel room doors. It opened, Randall's familiar silhouette visible for a moment before Celeste slipped inside. Sydney sat in stunned silence, her mind refusing to process what her eyes had just witnessed. Seconds stretched into minutes as she stared at the closed motel room door, willing it to be some sort of mistake, a misunderstanding, anything but the betrayal it so clearly was. Finally, operating on instinct rather than conscious thought, Sydney got out of her car. She raised her hand to knock, then paused, her fist trembling in midair. From inside she could hear muffled laughter, Celeste's musical giggle, Randall's deeper chuckle. The sounds of happiness and intimacy twisted like a knife in her gut. With a deep breath, Sydney steeled herself and rapped sharply on the door. The laughter inside abruptly ceased, replaced by hushed, panicked whispers. She knocked again, louder this time, her calm facade cracking as she called out. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before she heard movement inside. The door opened slowly, revealing Randall, his hair mussed and shirt hastily buttoned. Behind him, Sydney could see Celeste, her face a mask of guilt and fear. In that moment, as Sydney looked from her husband to her daughter, the full weight of their betrayal came crashing down upon her. Her world, already fragile, shattered completely. The tension in the small motel room was suffocating as Sydney stepped inside, her eyes darting between Randall and Celeste. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the hum of the ancient air conditioner and the pounding of Sydney's heart in her ears. Randall was the first to break the silence, his voice strained as he attempted to explain. But Sydney cut him off, her voice eerily calm. Randall stepped forward, attempting to shield Celeste. "Sydney, please. This isn't Celeste's fault." A harsh laugh escaped Sydney's lips. The argument escalated quickly, years of pent-up resentment and betrayal pouring out. Accusations flew back and forth. Sydney accused Randall of grooming Celeste, of taking advantage of her youth and innocence. Randall defended their relationship, insisting it was real love, that Celeste is an adult now. Celeste, caught between her mother and the man she thought she loved, tried desperately to mediate. She pleaded with Sydney to understand, swore that Randall had never taken advantage of her, that their feelings were mutual. But Sydney was beyond reason. In her eyes, this was the ultimate betrayal, not just of her as a wife, but as a mother. As the shouting reached a fever pitch, Sydney noticed Randall inching towards the bedside table. She saw the glint of metal and realized with a jolt of fear that he was reaching for something. The gun he always kept for protection. Time seemed to slow down. Sydney lunged for Randall, determined to stop him from doing something unthinkable. Celeste, seeing her mother's sudden movement, misinterpreted it as an attack on Randall and tried to intervene. In the ensuing scuffle, the gun went off. The sound of the shot was deafening in the small room. For a moment, everything went still. Then Celeste crumpled to the floor, a red stain blossoming on her shirt. Sydney's scream of anguish shattered the silence. Randall stood frozen, the gun slipping from his nerveless fingers. As Sydney frantically tried to stem the blood flowing from her daughter's wound, the full horror of what had happened began to sink in. Their secret was out, and the consequences were far more devastating than any of them could have imagined. The gunshot at the motel brought a swift response from local law enforcement. Within minutes, the small parking lot was awash in flashing lights as police cars and an ambulance converged on the scene. First responders found a tableau of tragedy in room 114. Celeste lay on the floor, barely clinging to life despite Sydney's desperate attempts to stop the bleeding. Randall Mamet sat slumped in a corner, his eyes vacant, the gun still on the floor where he had dropped it. Sydney, her hands and clothes covered in her daughter's blood, alternated between frantic pleas to the paramedics and incoherent sobs. Detective Liam Donovan, a veteran of the small police force, took charge of the scene. As Celeste was rushed to the hospital, Donovan began the grim task of piecing together what had happened in that motel room. The physical evidence was clear enough. One shot fired, one victim. The gun registered to Randall Mamet. But the why of it all was murkier. Initial questioning of Sydney and Randall yielded conflicting stories, both too distraught to provide a coherent account of events. As news of the shooting spread, the quiet community was rocked by shock and disbelief. The Mamets had always seemed like the perfect family, successful, respected, involved in local charities. The idea that such violence could erupt among them was almost inconceivable to their neighbors and friends. In the days that followed, as Celeste fought for her life in the ICU, Detective Donovan and his team worked tirelessly to unravel the truth. They combed through phone records, interviewed friends and colleagues, and dug into the family's background. Slowly, a picture began to emerge of a family not nearly as perfect as their polished exterior suggested. As Detective Donovan delved deeper into the Mamet case, the facade of the perfect family crumbled rapidly. Interviews with family friends and colleagues painted a picture of a marriage long devoid of love, held together by appearances and financial convenience. Beatrice Whitaker, Sydney's closest friend, provided crucial information about Sydney's growing suspicions in the months leading up to the shooting. She recounted tearful lunches where Sydney had confided her fears about Randall's possible infidelity, never suspecting the true nature of his betrayal. Randall's co-workers described a man who had seemed rejuvenated in recent months, speaking often of a new love in his life. They had assumed he was having a typical midlife crisis affair, never imagining the object of his affection was his own stepdaughter. But it was Celeste's college roommate who provided the most damning evidence. Once assured of police confidentiality, Zoe shared a trove of text messages Celeste had sent her. detailing the affair with Randall in the sort of giddy, love-struck language typical of a young woman in the throes of what she believed to be true love. The digital trail proved to be a goldmine for investigators. Subpoenaed phone records showed hundreds of calls and messages between Randall and Celeste, often at odd hours. Financial records showed a pattern of expensive gifts from Randall to Celeste, jewelry, designer clothes, even a car, all carefully hidden from Sydney. There were records of hotel stays, weekend getaways disguised as business trips or college visits. As the evidence mounted, the full extent of Randall and Celeste's deception became clear. This was no sudden passion, no momentary lapse in judgment. Their affair had been going on for over a year, meticulously planned and hidden from Sydney and the world. The revelation of the affair shed new light on the events in the motel room. What had first appeared to be a case of accidental discharge during a heated argument now looked more like a potential crime of passion. As Celeste slowly recovered in the hospital, the question on everyone's mind was, who had really pulled the trigger? Was it Randall attempting to silence Celeste to save himself? Sydney in a fit of rage at their betrayal? Or Celeste herself, overcome with guilt and shame when confronted by her mother? The truth, Detective Donovan suspected, might be more complex than any of them had initially thought. District Attorney took personal charge of the case. After reviewing the evidence gathered by Detective Donovan and his team, she made the decision to charge both Randall and Sydney Mamet with attempted murder. Randall, once the picture of corporate success, appeared haggard and defeated in his orange jumpsuit. His defense team, led by high-powered attorney Xavier Brockton, argued that the shooting had been a tragic accident, the result of a struggle for the gun during a heated family argument. Sydney, by contrast, seemed to have aged years in the weeks since the incident. Her lawyer painted her as a victim, a woman betrayed by her husband and daughter, who had acted in self-defense when she believed Randall was reaching for the gun to silence them both. The question of Celeste's role in the incident loomed large over the proceedings. As the only witness to the shooting besides her parents, her testimony would be crucial. But Celeste, still recovering from her injuries, had so far invoked her Fifth Amendment rights, refusing to testify against either parent. In the end, Randall Mamet accepted the plea deal. In a hushed courtroom, he pleaded guilty to aggravated assault, receiving a sentence of 10 years in prison. As he was led away in handcuffs, he locked eyes with Sydney one last time, a look that spoke volumes about the pain, betrayal, and regret that had torn their family apart. Sydney, charges against her dropped, left the courthouse a free woman, but one irrevocably changed by the ordeal. Within months, she had sold the family home and moved out of state, seeking a fresh start away from the whispers and sidelong glances. Celeste, once she recovered from her physical wounds, faced the daunting task of healing her emotional and psychological scars. She withdrew from college, entering intensive therapy to deal with the trauma of the shooting and the complicated emotions surrounding her relationship with Randall. Her relationship with Sydney remained strained, the breach of trust between mother and daughter, a chasm not easily bridged. The Mamet case faded from the national spotlight, but its impact lingered. It served as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most picture-perfect families can harbor dark secrets. The community, shaken by the violence that had erupted in their midst, began initiatives to address domestic violence and promote healthier family dynamics. Spencer Howard was a man who seemed to have it all. Born into one of Fairview's oldest families, he had inherited not just wealth, but also a legacy of civic responsibility. Spencer had taken the reins of the family business after graduating from Dartmouth with honors. Spencer cut an impressive figure in his tailored suits. He was known for his philanthropy, chairing the town's annual charity gala and serving on the board of the local hospital. To the outside world, Spencer appeared to be the very picture of success and respectability, yet those closest to him saw glimpses of a different man. His assistant, Bethany, noted his increasing distraction over the past year. His golf buddies at the country club commented on his sudden cancellations and vague excuses, and his wife, Laura, had confided in her sister about the growing distance between them. Reed Foster, on the other hand, was just beginning to carve out his place in the world. The son of Laura from her first marriage, Reed had moved with his mother when she married Spencer 7 years ago. Initially a sullen teenager struggling to adjust to small-town life after growing up in Boston, Reed had blossomed in recent years. Reed was popular among his peers. He had just started his junior year at the local community college, studying environmental science. His professors praised his passion and dedication, particularly his work on a project to restore the town's polluted river. Reed's transformation from a troubled teen to a promising young adult had been a source of pride for his mother and, outwardly at least, for his stepfather Spencer. Friends recalled seeing them together at the farmers' market on weekends, chatting animatedly about organic farming practices, but beneath the surface of this seemingly ordinary family dynamic lay currents of tension and desire that would ultimately lead to tragedy. As Detective Sawyer began to piece together the lives of Spencer and Reed, she would uncover a relationship far more complex and intimate than anyone could have imagined. As the early morning mist began to dissipate, Detective Sawyer took charge of the crime scene. Her first order of business was to secure the area and ensure that no evidence was contaminated. She instructed officers to set up a wider perimeter, keeping curious onlookers and the quickly assembling news vans at bay. Sawyer's keen eyes scanned the exterior of the house, noting the absence of any signs of forced entry. The manicured lawn and well-tended flower beds showed no signs of a struggle or hasty exit. Whatever had transpired, it seemed to have been contained within the walls of the Howard home. Donning protective gear, Sawyer entered the house, the scent of copper and something else, fear perhaps, hanging heavy in the air. She made her way to the study, where the bodies had been discovered. The room, with its dark wood paneling and leather-bound books, spoke of old money and tradition. Now it was a tableau of violence. Spencer lay sprawled across his antique desk, a crystal tumbler shattered on the floor beside him. Reed's body was crumpled near the fireplace, arm outstretched as if reaching for something, or someone. Both men were clad only in robes, an odd detail that Sawyer filed away for later consideration. As the forensics team began their meticulous work, photographing and cataloging every detail, Sawyer turned her attention to the rest of the house. She noted the untouched breakfast dishes in the sink, the 2 empty wine glasses on the coffee table in the living room, the rumpled sheets on the bed in the master bedroom. Each seemingly mundane detail could be a crucial piece of the puzzle. Sawyer knew that the key to solving this case lay not just in the physical evidence, but in understanding the complex dynamics of the Howard household. She would need to delve deep into the lives of Spencer, Reed, and Laura to uncover the truth behind this shocking crime. With a nod to her team, Sawyer stepped out onto the front porch. It was time to begin the interviews that would unravel the tangled web of the Howard family's secrets. Spencer and Laura's marriage had been the talk of town 7 years ago. Laura Fosterson, a divorced mother of 1, had swept into town like a breath of fresh air, capturing the heart of the town's most eligible bachelor. Their whirlwind romance culminated in a lavish wedding at the Howard family estate, with the whole town in attendance. Laura, with her vivacious personality and philanthropic interests, seemed the perfect match for Spencer. She threw herself into the role of society wife with gusto, chairing committees and hosting dinner parties. Yet those closest to the couple noticed the strain that began to show in recent years. Laura's sister, Audrey, later told investigators that Laura had confided in her about feeling increasingly isolated in her marriage. Spencer, for his part, had initially embraced his role as stepfather to young Reed. He had taken the boy fishing, attended his soccer games, and even hired tutors to help him improve his grades. But as Reed grew older, the dynamic between stepfather and stepson began to shift in ways that made some observers uncomfortable. Reed's childhood friend recounted an incident from their senior year of high school. She had stopped by the Howard house to pick up Reed for a study session and found him and Spencer in what appeared to be an intense conversation in the study. When they noticed her presence, both had jumped apart, looking flustered. At the time, Zoe had dismissed it as an argument, but in hindsight, she wondered if there had been more to the scene. As Reed matured into a handsome young man, bearing a striking resemblance to his biological father, the tension in the household seemed to increase. Laura, once so close to her son, found herself increasingly shut out of his life. She confided in friends that Reed and Spencer seemed to have their own private world, filled with inside jokes and shared interests that excluded her. The household staff, discreet as they were, couldn't help but notice changes in the family dynamic. The housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, recalled overhearing hushed arguments between Laura and Spencer, with Reed's name mentioned more than once. She also noted that Reed had taken to spending more time at the house rather than going out with friends, often sequestered in the study with Spencer for hours on end. As Detective Sawyer pieced together these fragments of the Howard family life, she began to see the outline of a story far more complex than a simple domestic dispute. As the investigation progressed, Detective Sawyer and her team began to peel back the layers of secrecy surrounding the Howard family. Their first breakthrough came from an unexpected source: the family's smart home system. Tech Specialist Officer Ravi Patel discovered that the house's security cameras, while not covering the interior spaces, had captured some intriguing footage. On the night of the murders, the exterior cameras showed Laura leaving the house at 7:30 p.m., her posture tense and movements hurried. More significantly, the cameras never recorded her return. This discovery led Sawyer to dig deeper into the digital lives of the victims. With a warrant in hand, she tasked Patel with examining the computers and phones belonging to Spencer and Reed. What they found was a treasure trove of hidden communications. On Spencer's work computer, buried deep in encrypted files, was a folder labeled Investments. But instead of financial documents, it contained hundreds of photos of Reed, some innocent, others far more intimate. There were also logs of text conversations between Spencer and Reed, dating back nearly 2 years, filled with coded language and veiled references to secret meetings. Reed's phone yielded even more damning evidence. Hidden behind a secure app disguised as a calculator were dozens of voice messages from Spencer. In these recordings, Spencer's usually confident voice was soft, almost vulnerable as he professed his love for Reed and his torment over their forbidden relationship. As news of these discoveries spread through the police department, officers who had known Spencer for years were left reeling. How could the man they thought they knew, a pillar of the community, a devoted husband, a caring stepfather, have been living such a double life? Witness testimonies began to take on new meaning in light of these revelations. Zoe Lawson's account of the tense scene she had witnessed years ago now seemed like a possible close call, a near discovery of the illicit relationship. Mrs. Abernathy's recollections of hushed arguments and long hours spent in the study painted a picture of a household teetering on the brink of implosion. But perhaps the most chilling piece of evidence came from Reed's best friend, Axel Rodriguez. In a tearful interview, Axel revealed that Reed had confided in him just a week before his death. Reed had been planning to end things with Spencer, saying he couldn't live with the guilt anymore. He had even mentioned the possibility of telling his mother everything. As Detective Sawyer compiled this mountain of evidence, she couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The secrets unearthed painted a picture of a family torn apart by forbidden passion and looming exposure. But they still didn't answer the most pressing question: who had killed Spencer and Reed, and why? The first hints of their forbidden attraction could be traced back to a family vacation in the Bahamas. A series of text messages following the trip revealed a growing emotional intimacy between stepfather and stepson, filled with inside jokes and veiled references. Their physical relationship seemed to have started a few months later, coinciding with a period when Laura was away on a 2-week charity mission in Haiti. Spencer and Reed's messages during this time were laden with anticipation and, later, expressions of guilt mixed with declarations of undeniable attraction. From that point on, the affair was conducted with meticulous care to avoid detection. They communicated primarily through encrypted apps, used code words to arrange meetings, and took advantage of Laura's frequent charity engagements to spend time together. Spencer went to great lengths to create opportunities for intimacy. He began working from home more often, citing a need for quiet to focus on important projects. He encouraged Reed to take online classes, ostensibly to save money on commuting, but effectively keeping him closer to home. He even renovated the study, adding soundproofing under the guise of creating a better work environment. To the outside world, their closeness was explained as a heartwarming example of a stepdad and stepson bonding. Spencer took Reed to exclusive social events, introducing him to influential people in the guise of mentorship. But there were close calls. Once, Laura had nearly walked in on them in a compromising position, saved only by the creak of a floorboard that gave them a moment's warning. Another time, a housemaid had found one of Reed's shirts in Spencer's study and questioned its presence, leading Spencer to hastily explain it away as laundry he was planning to donate. As the affair progressed, Both Spencer and Reed became increasingly skilled at leading double lives. They maintained their public personas: Spencer, the respected businessman and community leader; Reed, the promising student and environmental activist, while nurturing their secret passion behind closed doors. But as with all secrets, the weight of their deception was beginning to take its toll, setting the stage for the tragedy that was to come. As the investigation continued, Detective Sawyer turned her attention to Laura Howard. The grieving widow and mother had initially been treated as a victim, but the revelation of the affair between her husband and son cast her in a new light. Sawyer needed to scrutinize Laura's alibi for the night of the murders. Laura claimed she had been at a charity event in Burlington, about an hour's drive from Fairview, on the night in question. She stated that she had left home around 7:30 p.m., attended the gala until midnight, and then stayed overnight at the home of her friend, Cordelia Westbrook, returning to Fairview the following morning to discover the tragic scene. On the surface, her story seemed to check out. Several attendees at the charity gala confirmed seeing Laura there, elegantly dressed and seemingly in good spirits. Cordelia Westbrook corroborated Laura's account of staying the night at her house. However, as Sawyer dug deeper, inconsistencies began to emerge. While Laura had indeed been seen at the gala, no one could confirm her presence after 10:30 p.m. The event photographer's images showed her in the background of several shots early in the evening, but she was noticeably absent from later pictures. Furthermore, cell phone tower data revealed that Laura's phone had pinged off a tower just outside Fairview at 11:45 p.m., contradicting her claim of being in Burlington at that time. When confronted with this information, Laura became flustered, claiming she must have forgotten her phone in the car. Cordelia Westbrook's statement, too, began to unravel under scrutiny. While she maintained that Laura had stayed the night, she couldn't provide any specific details about their interactions that evening or the following morning. These discrepancies in Laura's alibi raised red flags for Sawyer. What had really happened on the night of the murders, and where had Laura Howard truly been? As Detective Sawyer pieced together the events of that fateful night, a chilling narrative began to emerge. Through a combination of forensic evidence, witness statements, and digital footprints, she reconstructed the final hours of Spencer Howard and Reed Foster. The day had begun like any other. Spencer had gone to his office in the morning, while Reed attended classes at the community college. They had exchanged several texts throughout the day, their messages a mix of mundane chat and coded references to their secret relationship. Laura had spent the afternoon preparing for the charity gala, her movements around the house captured by the smart home system. At 7:30 p.m., she left for what she claimed was the event. The exterior cameras recorded her departure, her designer gown glittering in the fading light. Neighbors reported seeing Reed's car pull into the driveway around 8:15 p.m. The smart home system logged the front door opening and closing at 8:17 p.m. From there, the digital breadcrumbs became more scarce but no less telling. At 8:30 p.m., the system recorded music beginning to play in the study, a jazz playlist that both Spencer and Reed favored. The volume was turned up higher than usual, a detail that would later prove significant. Mrs. Abernathy, who lived in the guest house on the property, recalled hearing muffled voices and laughter from the main house around 9 p.m. when she stepped out to water her plants. She thought nothing of it at the time, assuming Spencer was entertaining a business associate. The last digital trace of normalcy came at 9:45 p.m., when Spencer's phone logged a search for a recipe for old-fashioned cocktails. After that, an eerie digital silence fell over the house. It was what happened in the next 2 hours that Sawyer and her team struggled to piece together. The forensic evidence painted a gruesome picture. Both Spencer and Reed had died from multiple stab wounds, but the attacks had occurred in different parts of the study. Spencer was found at his desk, suggesting he had been taken by surprise. Reed, on the other hand, was found near the fireplace, indicating he might have tried to flee or defend himself. The murder weapon, a letter opener from Spencer's desk, was found wiped clean of prints and discarded in the wastebasket. The killer had been methodical, taking time to clean up some of the blood spatter, though they had clearly been interrupted before they could complete the task. Most intriguingly, traces of DNA that didn't belong to either victim were found under Reed's fingernails, suggesting a struggle. This DNA was in the process of being analyzed, but Sawyer had a sinking feeling she knew whose it would turn out to be. The smart home system logged the front door opening and closing again at 11:52 p.m. This coincided with the cell tower ping from Laura's phone just outside of the area. As Sawyer stared at the timeline she had constructed, she couldn't shake the image of Laura Howard, still in her glittering gala gown, stepping back into her home to confront her husband and son. What had she seen? What had driven her to such a violent act? And how had she managed to attend part of the charity event and still return home in time to commit the murders? The answers, Sawyer suspected, lay in the complex web of lies, love, and betrayal that had ensnared the Howard family. As news of the murders spread through residents, the community reeled in shock. The Howard family had been a cornerstone of local society for generations, and the brutal nature of the crimes seemed at odds with the town's peaceful facade. The turning point in the investigation came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. 2 weeks after the murders, Detective Sawyer was reviewing security footage from businesses along the route for the umpteenth time when she noticed something odd. A gas station camera had captured Laura's distinctive red sports car, pulling in at 10:15 p.m. on the night of the murders. The timestamp conflicted with Laura's claim of being at the charity gala at that time. More importantly, the footage showed Laura emerging from her car in a state of obvious distress, her elegant gown replaced by a nondescript sweatsuit. Armed with this new evidence, Sawyer obtained a warrant to search Laura's car. The forensics team combed through the vehicle, finding traces of blood in the trunk that matched both Spencer and Reed. Hidden under the spare tire, they discovered a plastic bag containing the gala gown, stained with blood and hastily stuffed away. But the most damning piece of evidence was found in the car's navigation system. It had recorded a route from the charity gala location in Burlington back to Fairview, with a timestamp indicating Laura had left the event much earlier than she had claimed. Confronted with this evidence, Laura's carefully constructed alibi began to crumble. In a tense interrogation, she finally broke down and confessed to the murders. Through tears, Laura revealed that she had suspected the affair between her husband and son for months, but had been in denial. On the night of the gala, she had forgotten her phone and returned home to retrieve it, only to hear sounds coming from the study. Peering through a crack in the door, she had witnessed an intimate moment between Spencer and Reed that confirmed her worst fears. In a state of shock and rage, Laura had quietly left the house and driven to the gala, forcing herself to make an appearance. But as the evening wore on, her emotions overwhelmed her. She left the event early, changed into clothes she kept in her car for emergencies, and returned home to confront Spencer and Reed. The confrontation had quickly escalated into violence. In her fury, Laura had grabbed the letter opener from Spencer's desk and attacked them both. The act had been one of temporary insanity, she claimed, a moment of blind rage at the betrayal she had suffered. With Laura's confession, the case seemed solved. But for Detective Sawyer, the tragedy of the Howard family was far from over. The ripple effects of this crime would be felt in Fairview for years to come. The arrest of Laura Howard sent shockwaves through Fairview. On a crisp morning in early November, residents watched in stunned silence as Detective Sawyer led the woman they had known as a philanthropist and socialite out of the police station in handcuffs. As the date of the trial approached, both the prosecution and defense teams worked tirelessly to build their cases. In her opening statement, District Attorney painted a vivid picture of a woman consumed by jealousy and rage, meticulously planning and executing the murders of her husband and son. She promised the jury that the evidence would show Laura's actions were calculated and deliberate. Jameson Whitaker, in his opening remarks, countered with a portrayal of Laura as a loving wife and mother, whose world had been shattered by an unthinkable betrayal. He asked the jury to consider the immense psychological toll of discovering such a transgression within one's own family. As the trial progressed, a parade of witnesses took the stand. Forensic experts detailed the brutal nature of the attacks, their clinical descriptions causing several jurors to blanch. Detective Sawyer testified about the investigation, her measured responses belying the emotional toll the case had taken on her. The most dramatic moment came when Cordelia Westbrook, Laura's friend and alibi, took the stand. Under intense cross-examination, Cordelia broke down and admitted that Laura had asked her to lie about the night she spent at her house. The revelation sent murmurs rippling through the courtroom, but it was Laura's own testimony that captivated the courtroom. Taking the stand against her lawyer's advice, she spoke in a quiet, trembling voice about the night she discovered Spencer and Reed together. She described the shock, the disbelief, and then the all-consuming rage that had overtaken her. Tears streamed down her face as she recounted the moment she had picked up the letter opener, claiming she had only meant to confront them but lost control. Her anguished description of stabbing the two people she had loved most in the world left many in the courtroom, including some jurors visibly moved. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned to the packed courtroom. On the charge of first-degree murder for Spencer Howard, the jury found Laura guilty. On the charge of first-degree murder for Reed Foster, the jury found Laura guilty. She sentenced Laura Howard to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Laura was led away, the Howard family tragedy came to its legal conclusion. But for the town and all those involved, the repercussions would be felt for years to come. The Hargroves and the Velasquez families, to all outward appearances, were living the American dream. Their manicured lawns and hybrid cars in the driveways gave no hint of the tempest brewing behind closed doors. Liam and Rachel Hargrove had been college sweethearts, married for 15 years. Liam, a software engineer for a local tech startup, was known for his dry wit and passion for homebrewing. Rachel, a pediatric nurse, volunteered at the neighborhood watch and was always ready with a plate of her famous lavender shortbread for new neighbors. They were the couple others looked to as a model of stability and success. Just 2 doors down lived Rafael and Marisol Velasquez. Rafael, a charismatic restaurateur, had moved from Mexico City a decade ago to open what would become the hottest fusion taqueria. His wife Marisol, a yoga instructor and part-time translator, was beloved for her vibrant energy and warm hugs. Their whirlwind romance had culminated in a beachside wedding in Tulum just 5 years prior. The two couples had become fast friends shortly after the Velasquez moved in, bonding over weekend barbecues and a shared love for wineries. They vacationed together and celebrated holidays as a unit. To their friends and neighbors, they were the picture of modern multicultural friendship. But beneath the surface of potlucks and game nights, a current of restlessness was growing, a longing for excitement, for newness, for the spark that had faded in the routines of married life. It was this unspoken desire that would lead them down a path from which there was no return. The idea first surfaced on a crisp autumn evening, as the 4 friends lounged in the Hargroves' hot tub, steam rising into the star-studded sky. The wine had been flowing freely, loosening tongues and lowering inhibitions. Raphael, always the jokester, had made a quip about wife-swapping that hung in the air a beat too long before nervous laughter dispersed it. But the seed had been planted. Over the next few weeks, the joke resurfaced, each time met with less laughter and more contemplative silence. It was Rachel who finally broached the subject seriously. During one of the couple's regular dinner dates, "We're all adults here," she began, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands beneath the table. "Maybe there's something to this idea. A way to spice things up." The silence that followed was deafening. Marisol's eyes widened, darting between her husband and friends. Liam stared intently at his plate. It was Raphael who broke the tension, his usual grin replaced by a look of thoughtful consideration. The conversation that followed lasted deep into the night. Boundaries were discussed, scenarios explored, concerns voiced. Liam, initially the most hesitant, found himself warming to the idea as the others talked through the logistics. Marisol, surprisingly, was the most enthusiastic once the initial shock wore off. "It's just physical, right?" she said, her dark eyes sparkling with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "No feelings involved, a temporary arrangement to explore and then return to our partners." They agreed to think it over individually, and as couples before making any decisions. The next week was filled with hushed conversations behind closed doors, furtive glances across the street, and more than one sleepless night spent staring at the ceiling, imagining possibilities. When they reconvened, the decision was unanimous if tentative. They would try it, just once to see how it felt. Rules were established. A 1-month time frame, complete honesty with their original partners, and the freedom to call it off at any time if anyone felt uncomfortable. As they raised their glasses to seal the agreement, none of them could have foreseen the tragedy that would unfold from this moment of adventurous curiosity. The die was cast, and the wheel of fate had begun to turn. The agreed-upon evening arrived with a palpable tension in the air. The Hargroves' home, usually a warm and inviting space, felt charged with an electric anticipation. Liam had spent the afternoon obsessively cleaning, a nervous habit that manifested whenever he felt out of his depth. Rachel, meanwhile, had changed outfits no less than 5 times before settling on a simple black dress that hugged her curves. Across the street, Raphael and Marisol prepared with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Raphael, ever the showman, had set out candles and opened a bottle of expensive tequila he'd been saving for a special occasion. Marisol moved through her son's salutations, trying to center herself and calm the butterflies in her stomach. At precisely 8 p.m., as agreed, Rachel made the short walk to the Velasquez home. Her heart pounded with each step, a mixture of guilt and exhilaration coursing through her veins. Raphael greeted her at the door with a warm smile and a glass of tequila, which she accepted gratefully. Meanwhile, Marisol arrived at the Hargroves, a vision in a flowing red dress that seemed to accentuate her every movement. Liam, usually so composed, found himself fumbling with the wine opener, suddenly acutely aware of Marisol's presence in a way he'd never been before. The initial moments were awkward, filled with stilted small talk and nervous laughter. But as the alcohol flowed and the reality of their situation set in, the atmosphere began to shift. Raphael, ever the charmer, regaled Rachel with stories of his childhood, each tale bringing him physically closer to her on the couch. Rachel found herself captivated, not just by the stories, but by the passion with which he told them, so different from Liam's reserved nature. Across the street, Liam and Marisol had moved from the living room to the kitchen, where Marisol insisted on teaching Liam how to properly make guacamole. The simple act of chopping avocados became an intimate dance, their hands brushing against each other. As the night progressed, inhibitions lowered and desires rose to the surface. Raphael's hand found its way to Rachel's thigh, and she surprised herself by not pulling away. In the Hargrove kitchen, Liam found himself mesmerized by the graceful curves of Marisol. The transition from social interaction to physical intimacy was both abrupt and natural. A lingering look, a tentative touch, and suddenly they were crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. Clothes were shed, breaths quickened, and in the dim light of bedrooms usually shared with other partners, new connections were forged. In the aftermath, as they lay in unfamiliar beds beside familiar friends, each participant grappled with a complex mix of emotions. Guilt, excitement, confusion, and a strange sense of loss all mingled together. As they drifted off to sleep, none of them realized that this night had set in motion a chain of events that would end in tragedy. For in the dim light of the Hargrove bedroom, Liam had looked into Marisol's eyes and felt something stir within him that went far beyond the physical boundaries they had agreed upon. In the days following the swap, life in the Laurelhurst neighborhood seemed to return to its usual rhythm. Liam went back to his coding, Rachel to her patients, Raphael to his restaurant, and Marisol to her yoga studio. But beneath the veneer of normalcy, a subtle shift had occurred, particularly within Liam Hargrove. At first, the changes were almost imperceptible. Liam found himself lingering a little longer at the window, his gaze drifting towards the Velasquez home. He began taking more frequent walks, timing them to coincide with Marisol's return from her yoga classes. His usual playlist of tech podcasts was replaced by the Latin music Raphael had introduced him to, the rhythms reminding him of Marisol. As weeks passed, these small changes became more pronounced. Liam's colleagues at the startup noticed his distraction, his usual laser focus on code, replaced by long periods of staring blankly at his screen. He began learning Spanish using a language app, telling Rachel it was for an upcoming project at work. Late at night, when sleep eluded him, he found himself scrolling through old photos on his phone, lingering on group pictures where Marisol's smile seemed to outshine everything else. Liam tried to rationalize these feelings, to suppress the growing emotional attachment he felt towards Marisol. He reminded himself of the agreement, of the boundaries they had set. This was supposed to be a one-time thing, a purely physical exploration. But in quiet moments, he couldn't deny the warmth that spread through his chest when he thought of her laugh, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. The internal struggle began to manifest externally. Liam became irritable, snapping at Rachel over small issues. He threw himself into work, staying late at the office to avoid the temptation of seeking out Marisol's company. When the two couples did get together, Liam's behavior oscillated between overly attentive to Marisol and completely avoiding her, drawing curious glances from both Rachel and Raphael. One evening, as Liam lay awake beside a sleeping Rachel, the full weight of his emotions crashed over him. He realized, with a mix of exhilaration and horror, that he was falling in love with Marisol. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. He knew he should end it, should confess to Rachel and distance himself from Marisol, but the mere idea of never being close to her again felt like a physical pain in his chest. As dawn broke, Liam made a decision. He would try harder to suppress these feelings, to be the husband Rachel deserved. But even as he resolved this, a small part of him whispered that it was already too late. The seed of desire had been planted, and it was growing into something that couldn't be easily uprooted. As autumn gave way to winter, the once warm and easy friendship between the two couples began to cool. The change was subtle at first, manifesting in canceled plans and shorter, less frequent interactions. But as weeks passed, the tension became palpable, a silent presence at every gathering. Rachel was the first to notice the shift in her husband's behavior. Liam, once an open book to her, had become distant and guarded. She caught him checking his phone more frequently, his face lighting up at certain notifications before quickly schooling his features back to neutrality. When she asked about his day, his answers became vague and evasive. During one of their now rare dinners with the Velasquez, Rachel couldn't help but notice the way Liam's eyes followed Marisol's every movement. Raphael, usually jovial and laid back, began to exhibit signs of stress. His legendary patience in the kitchen shortened, and staff at his restaurant whispered about his uncharacteristic outbursts. At home, he became possessive of Marisol in a way he'd never been before, questioning her about her daily activities and suggesting they spend less time with the Hargroves. Marisol, caught in the middle, found herself torn between her growing affection for Liam and her commitment to Raphael. She tried to maintain normalcy, suggesting double dates and neighborhood gatherings like before, but each interaction was fraught with unspoken tensions and loaded glances. The breaking point came at a neighborhood block party in early December. As holiday lights twinkled on every house, the four found themselves together for the first time in weeks. The conversation was stilted, punctuated by long silences and forced laughter. When Marisol excused herself to get a drink, Liam immediately offered to help, leaving Rachel and Raphael alone. Rachel, her suspicions finally boiling over, confronted Raphael. "Is there something going on between them?" she demanded, her voice low but intense. Raphael, his own jealousy and fears rising to the surface, lashed out defensively. "Maybe you should ask your husband that," he snapped back. Their heated exchange drew the attention of other partygoers, and by the time Liam and Marisol returned, they found their spouses in a tense standoff. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of awkward apologies and hasty goodbyes. That night in both households, long-avoided conversations finally took place. Accusations were made, denials issued, and tears shed. Rachel demanded answers from Liam, her voice cracking as she asked if he was in love with Marisol. Liam's hesitation before his denial was all the confirmation she needed. Across the street, Raphael's jealousy exploded into a rage that left Marisol shaken. His accusations of betrayal and demands for the truth echoed through their home, a jarring contrast to the peaceful life they'd built. As the night wore on, all four individuals grappled with the realization that their simple agreement had spiraled into something far more complicated and potentially destructive. The foundation of trust that had supported their friendships and marriages was crumbling, and in its place, a volatile mix of love, jealousy, and resentment was taking root. January 15th dawned cold and gray, a thick fog hanging over the town like a portent of the tragedy to come. The weeks following the block party confrontation had been tense, with both couples retreating into themselves, communication reduced to terse texts and avoided glances across the street. That evening, Liam sat in his home office, ostensibly working late but in reality lost in thoughts of Marisol. The sound of the front door opening and closing jolted him from his reverie. Rachel's voice, tight with barely controlled emotion, called out his name. In the living room, Liam found not just Rachel but Raphael and Marisol as well. The atmosphere was charged, Raphael's face a mask of barely contained fury, Marisol's eyes red-rimmed and pleading. Rachel stood apart, her posture rigid, arms crossed defensively across her chest. "We need to talk," Rachel began, her voice trembling slightly. "All of us. This has gone on long enough." What followed was a maelstrom of emotions, years of friendship, and months of hidden feelings exploding into the open. Raphael accused Liam of pursuing Marisol, of trying to steal her away. Rachel, tears streaming down her face, demanded to know how long the affair had been going on. Marisol, caught between her growing feelings for Liam and her loyalty to Raphael, tried desperately to calm the situation. Liam, overwhelmed by the onslaught, initially retreated into denial. But as the accusations flew and emotions heightened, something inside him snapped. In a moment of reckless honesty, he confessed his feelings for Marisol, his words cutting through the chaos like a knife. Raphael, his face contorting with rage, lunged at Liam. The two men grappled, years of friendship evaporating in an instant as fists flew and furniture toppled. Rachel screamed for them to stop, her pleas drowned out by the sounds of the struggle. Marisol tried to intervene, attempting to pull Raphael away, but was shoved aside in the chaos. In the frenzy, no one noticed Raphael's hand closing around a heavy crystal vase. It wasn't until the sickening thud of crystal meeting flesh and bone echoed through the room that everything froze. Liam crumpled to the ground, blood pooling rapidly around his head. The vase slipped from Raphael's hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. For a moment, no one moved, the scene before them too horrific to comprehend. It was Rachel who broke the paralysis, her nurse's training kicking in as she rushed to Liam's side. Her fingers frantically sought a pulse as she barked orders at the others to call 911. Marisol, shaking uncontrollably, fumbled with her phone, her tear-blurred vision making it hard to dial. Raphael stood motionless, his face a mask of shock and disbelief at what he had done. The sound of sirens in the distance broke through the haze, snapping him back to the horrifying reality of the situation. Paramedics arrived minutes later, but their efforts were in vain. Liam Hargrove was pronounced dead at the scene, his life extinguished in a moment of uncontrolled passion. As police cars pulled up, their flashing lights illuminating the quiet street, neighbors emerged from their homes drawn by the commotion. In the chaos that followed, statements were taken, evidence collected. Raphael, still in a state of shock, offered no resistance as he was handcuffed and led to a waiting police car. As dawn broke, the idyllic facade of Laurelhurst had been shattered. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the morning breeze, a stark contrast to the well-manicured lawns and cheerful holiday decorations that still adorned some homes. The investigation into Liam Hargrove's death began in earnest the following morning. Detective Amelia Schaefer, a veteran of Homicide Division, took charge of the case, unaware of the shocking plot twist that was about to be revealed. Her first step was to separate the three survivors, each sequestered in a different interview room at the precinct. Rachel Hargrove, still in shock, provided a disjointed account of the evening's events. She spoke of the growing tension between the couples, the suspicions that had eaten away at her for weeks. Her description of the fatal confrontation was punctuated by bouts of sobbing and long haunted silences. Marisol Velasquez, visibly distraught, initially refused to speak without a lawyer present. When one arrived, she gave a tearful confession about the affair with Liam, insisting that it had been emotional rather than physical since the initial swap. She described Raphael's increasing jealousy and controlling behavior in the weeks leading up to the tragedy. Raphael Velasquez, advised by his lawyer to remain silent, sat stoically through initial questioning. However, as the hours wore on and the gravity of his situation became clear, he broke down. In a moment of raw honesty, he admitted to striking Liam but insisted he never meant to kill him. It was an accident, he repeated over and over, his voice hoarse with emotion. As statements were taken, forensic teams combed through both the Hargrove and Velasquez residences. They uncovered a series of text messages between Liam and Marisol, revealing the depth of their emotional entanglement. Emails drafts found on Liam's computer showed he had been contemplating leaving Rachel, adding another layer to the tragedy. The murder weapon, the crystal vase, was sent to the lab for analysis. Fingerprints matched Raphael's, and traces of Liam's blood and hair were found embedded in the shattered pieces. The force required to cause such catastrophic injury was consistent with Raphael's build and the rage described by witnesses. Neighbors were interviewed, painting a picture of two couples who had once been the cornerstone of the community. Many expressed shock, unable to reconcile the violent act with the friendly, successful people they thought they knew. As the investigation progressed, Detective Schaefer began to piece together a timeline of events. The initial wife swap, intended as a one-time exploration, had sparked an emotional affair between Liam and Marisol. This, in turn, had led to mounting tensions and suspicions, culminating in the fatal confrontation. The case, initially seeming straightforward, grew more complex as layers of motivation and circumstance were revealed. As the first week of the investigation drew to a close, Detective Schaefer stood before a board covered in photos, timelines, and connecting threads. The facts were clear, but the full truth of what had transpired in the Hargrove living room that fateful night remained elusive. The case was far from closed, and the ripples of this tragedy would continue to spread through the lives of all involved. As the investigation deepened, Detective Schaefer and her team began to uncover layers of complexity that went beyond the surface narrative. Delving into the backgrounds of all four individuals involved revealed hidden motivations and long-buried secrets that cast the events in a new light. Liam Hargrove, it emerged, had a history of depression that he had carefully hidden from all but Rachel. Interviews with his colleagues revealed a man who had been struggling with his work in recent months, his usual passion for coding replaced by a listlessness that many had attributed to simple burnout. A deeper dive into his medical records showed a recent change in antidepressant medication, one that came with warnings about increased impulsivity and mood swings. Rachel's perfected image of the devoted wife and nurse also began to crack under scrutiny. Former co-workers spoke of her intense ambition, of opportunities for advancement she had passed up to support Liam's career. Some hinted at resentment that had been building for years, carefully hidden behind a facade of contentment. Her enthusiastic suggestion of the wife swap began to look less like a spontaneous idea and more like a calculated risk to shake up her stagnant marriage. Rafael Velasquez's charismatic exterior concealed a man haunted by insecurities. Immigration records revealed a complicated history, with Rafael having overstayed a student visa years ago before marrying Marisol and gaining legal status. This precarious past had left him with a deep-seated fear of losing everything he had built, manifesting in his recent controlling behavior towards Marisol. Perhaps most surprisingly, Marisol's image as the carefree yoga instructor belied a woman with hidden depths. A sealed juvenile record from her teenage years in California hinted at a troubled past she had worked hard to overcome. Friends from before her marriage to Rafael described a passionate, often reckless young woman who had seemingly transformed herself into the picture of stability upon moving to Portland. As these details came to light, the narrative of the case shifted. What had initially seemed a straightforward crime of passion revealed itself to be the culmination of years of unspoken tensions, secret struggles, and unfulfilled desires. The wife swap agreement, far from being the catalyst, now appeared to be merely the spark that had ignited a powder keg of suppressed emotions and hidden resentments. Detective Schaefer found herself grappling with a case that defied easy categorization. The lines between victim and perpetrator blurred, with each person involved bearing some measure of responsibility for the tragedy that had unfolded. The trial of Rafael Velasquez for the murder of Liam Hargrove began on a rainy Monday in late spring, nearly 6 months after the fatal confrontation. Rafael, looking gaunt and somber in a dark suit, was led in by his defense team. Rachel Hargrove, still wearing her grief like a shroud, entered flanked by supportive colleagues. Marisol, who would be testifying for both the prosecution and the defense, slipped in through a side entrance, her once vibrant presence dimmed by months of guilt and public scrutiny. Inside the courtroom, District Attorney laid out the prosecution's case. She painted a picture of Rafael as a man consumed by jealousy, who had lashed out in a premeditated act of violence. The crystal vase, she argued, had been grabbed with intent, the fatal blow delivered with the full force of Rafael's rage. In contrast, Rafael's defense team presented their client as a man pushed to the breaking point. They spoke of the sanctity of marriage, of the betrayal Rafael had suffered, and of the confrontation as a moment of temporary insanity rather than calculated murder. Over the next 3 weeks, a parade of witnesses took the stand. Forensic experts debated the force and angle of the fatal blow. Neighbors recounted the gradual shift in dynamics between the two couples. Colleagues and friends of both Liam and Rafael testified to their states of mind in the weeks leading up to the tragedy. As the trial neared its end, both the prosecution and defense made impassioned final arguments. The judge, taking into account Rafael's unique circumstances of the case, sentenced him to 18 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 12 years. The sentence was met with mixed reactions, some feeling it was too lenient, others believing it appropriately balanced justice with mercy. Octavia and Oscar Fairweather's love story began like a fairy tale. They met as undergraduates at Creekside College, where Octavia studied art, and Oscar pursued a degree in business administration. Octavia captivated Oscar from the moment he saw her by the campus lake. Oscar, tall and charismatic with a disarming smile, wooed Octavia with his charm and ambition. They married shortly after graduation, with dreams of building a life together in their hometown. Octavia secured a position as an art teacher at high school, where her passion for creativity and nurturing young talent quickly made her a favorite among students and faculty alike. Oscar, leveraging his family connections, landed a job at a prestigious local investment firm, climbing the corporate ladder with remarkable speed. As the years passed, the Fairweathers became pillars of the Creekside community. They were fixtures at galas and town council meetings. Their home in Oakwood Estates, purchased with Oscar's growing wealth, became a symbol of their success. Octavia's artistic touch was evident in every room, from the hand-painted murals in the living room to the carefully curated sculptures in their backyard. To the outside world, Octavia and Oscar were the epitome of a power couple. They complemented each other perfectly. Octavia's creativity balancing Oscar's business acumen, her warmth softening his sometimes brusque demeanor. Friends often remarked on how they still looked at each other with the same adoration they had in college. Yet beneath the surface of this picture-perfect life, there were undercurrents of tension. Octavia and Oscar had been trying to conceive for years without success. The strain of fertility treatments and dashed hopes began to wear on their relationship. Oscar threw himself into his work, spending long hours at the office, while Octavia found solace in her art and her students. It was during this challenging time that Octavia's relationship with her mother, Cordelia Prescott, became a source of comfort and support. Cordelia, a widow who lived on the outskirts of town, had always been a free spirit. In her youth, she had traveled the world as a photojournalist, settling down in Creekside only after meeting Octavia's father. After his passing, Cordelia had retreated into a quieter life, focusing on her garden and her volunteer work at the local animal shelter. As Octavia spent more time with her mother, Oscar found himself drawn into Cordelia's orbit as well. What began as polite conversation during family dinners slowly evolved into something more, setting the stage for a betrayal that would tear the Fairweather family apart. The seeds of the affair between Oscar and Cordelia were planted on a crisp autumn evening. Octavia, consumed with preparing for an upcoming art exhibition featuring her students' work, Oscar, feeling neglected and frustrated by the growing distance in his marriage, decided to go to Cordelia's cottage alone, ostensibly to check on his mother-in-law. Cordelia, surprised but pleased by the unexpected visit, welcomed Oscar with a warm smile and a glass of her homemade wine. As they sat in her small, cluttered living room, surrounded by eclectic souvenirs from her travels, Oscar found himself opening up about his marital troubles. Cordelia listened with empathy, her eyes, so similar to Octavia's, filled with understanding. Perhaps it was the wine, or the intimate atmosphere, or simply the need for human connection. But that night a line was crossed. A comforting touch lingered too long. A gaze held more meaning than it should have. By the time Oscar left Cordelia's cottage, both knew that something had irrevocably changed. In the weeks that followed, Oscar and Cordelia manufactured reasons to see each other. Cordelia suddenly needed help with home repairs, while Oscar discovered a newfound interest in gardening. Their clandestine meetings became more frequent, always carefully timed to avoid suspicion. During one of their early encounters, Oscar arrived at Cordelia's cottage to help fix a leaky faucet. As they worked side by side in the cramped space of her bathroom, the air between them grew thick with unspoken tension. Their hands brushed accidentally, sending electric shocks through both of them. When Cordelia reached past Oscar for a towel, he caught the scent of her perfume, a heady mix of jasmine and vanilla that made his head swim. Their eyes met in the mirror, and for a moment neither could look away. On a warm Sunday afternoon, Cordelia was showing Oscar how to prune her rose bushes. As she demonstrated the technique, standing close behind him to guide his hands, both were acutely aware of their physical proximity. The gentle brush of her breath on his neck, the warmth of her body against his back, sent shivers down Oscar's spine. When he turned to ask a question, their faces were inches apart. Time seemed to stand still as they stood there, frozen in a moment of forbidden desire. During a rare moment alone at a family gathering, Oscar and Cordelia stole away to the secluded garden behind the house. Hidden from view by a trellis covered in climbing roses, they gave in to their desires. Their kisses were urgent, hands roaming with a desperation born of stolen moments. As they heard Octavia's voice calling for them, they quickly separated, straightening their clothes and hair. The guilt was immediate, but so was the thrill of their secret affair, adding a dangerous excitement to their illicit encounters. Their affair consumed them, blinding them to the consequences of their actions. In Cordelia's bedroom, a space once reserved for solitary nights, they now created a world of secret passion. The creak of bed springs and hushed whispers became a symphony of their illicit love, playing out against the backdrop of familial betrayal. As their physical intimacy deepened, so too did their emotional entanglement. What had started as a physical attraction morphed into something more complex and dangerous. They began to imagine a future together, heedless of the devastation such dreams would wreak on their family. It was this combination of physical passion and emotional connection that would ultimately lead to their undoing. They justified their actions in whispered conversations. Oscar spoke of feeling unappreciated and misunderstood by Octavia, while Cordelia confessed to a loneliness that had plagued her since her husband's death. They convinced themselves that their connection was special, something that transcended the boundaries of the conventional. As the affair deepened, so did their web of lies. Oscar began to invent business trips and late meetings. Cordelia feigned illness to avoid family gatherings. They communicated through a secret email account and disposable phones, always careful to cover their tracks. But with each deception, the weight of guilt grew heavier. Oscar found it increasingly difficult to look Octavia in the eye, while Cordelia's interactions with her daughter became strained and awkward. The very relationship that had once been Octavia's source of comfort was now tainted by betrayal. Neither Oscar nor Cordelia could have foreseen the devastating consequences their actions would have on the entire Fairweather family. As they continued their illicit liaison, they remained oblivious to the suspicions beginning to form in Octavia's mind. The first inkling that something was amiss came to Octavia on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. She had decided to surprise Oscar with lunch at his office, only to be told by his confused secretary that he had left early, mentioning a meeting with a client. Octavia brushed it off as a miscommunication, but a seed of doubt had been planted. Over the following weeks, Octavia began to notice subtle changes in Oscar's behavior. He was more distracted, often lost in thought during their conversations. His phone would buzz at odd hours, and he would step out of the room to take calls in hushed tones. When questioned, Oscar would dismiss her concerns with vague explanations about work stress and important deals in the pipeline. Octavia's artistic sensitivity, usually a source of joy in her life, now became a curse as she picked up on minute details that others might have missed. The faint scent of unfamiliar perfume on Oscar's clothes, a lipstick smudge on a coffee mug he brought home from the office, the way he sometimes avoided her touch. All these observations accumulated in her mind, forming a picture she didn't want to see. Her relationship with her mother also began to change. Cordelia, once eager to spend time with her daughter, now seemed distant and preoccupied. Their weekly tea sessions became less frequent, with Cordelia often canceling at the last minute, citing various commitments. When they did meet, Octavia sensed a nervousness in her mother's demeanor, a reluctance to meet her eyes that was entirely out of character. As her suspicions grew, Octavia found herself trapped in a spiral of doubt and self-recrimination. She questioned every interaction, analyzed every word spoken by Oscar and Cordelia. Was she imagining things? Had the stress of their fertility struggles and her upcoming exhibition made her paranoid? Determined to find the truth, Octavia began to investigate discreetly. She checked Oscar's credit card statements, noting several charges at restaurants and hotels that he had never mentioned. She drove by her mother's cottage at odd hours, her heart sinking when she spotted Oscar's car parked down the street on an evening when he was supposedly working late. Each new piece of evidence felt like a physical blow, chipping away at the foundation of trust that had been the bedrock of her life. Octavia's students and colleagues noticed the change in her demeanor, the dark circles under her eyes, the tremor in her hands as she demonstrated brush techniques, the forced smile that never quite reached her eyes. As the days passed, Octavia became a shadow of her former self, torn between confronting her fears and clinging to the last shreds of hope that she was mistaken. Little did she know that the truth, when it finally came to light, would be even more devastating than she could have imagined. The day Octavia's world shattered began like any other. It was a Saturday, and she had spent the morning at the school, putting the finishing touches on the student art exhibition. Oscar had left early, mumbling something about a golf game with clients. As Octavia drove home, her mind preoccupied with last-minute details for the upcoming show, she decided on a whim to stop by her mother's cottage. Perhaps a cup of tea and a chat would help calm her nerves. As Octavia turned onto the quiet lane leading to Cordelia's home, her heart nearly stopped. There parked behind was Oscar's sleek black sedan. For a moment, Octavia sat in her car, hands gripping the steering wheel. She told herself there could be an innocent explanation, but deep down she knew. With trembling legs, Octavia approached the cottage. The curtains were drawn, but through a gap she could see movement inside. Taking a deep breath, she used her key to unlock the door, pushing it open as quietly as possible. The sight that greeted her would be forever seared into her memory. There, on the floral-patterned couch, they were locked in an intimate embrace, oblivious to the world around them. Cordelia's hair was disheveled, Oscar's shirt partially unbuttoned. On the coffee table, 2 half-empty wine glasses stood as mute witnesses to their betrayal. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, as if sensing her presence, Oscar and Cordelia looked up. The expressions on their faces, shock, guilt, and a flicker of defiance. What followed was a blur of emotions and accusations. Octavia's anguished cry broke the silence, startling the guilty pair. Oscar jumped to his feet, stammering excuses and pleas. Cordelia remained seated, her face ashen, tears streaming down her cheeks. Octavia, her voice raw with pain and fury, hurled questions at them. The answers, when they came, were like daggers to her heart. 6 months. It had started as friendship, then evolved. They hadn't meant for it to happen. They were sorry. Unable to bear their presence any longer, Octavia fled the cottage. She drove aimlessly for hours, her mind replaying the scene over and over. By the time she returned home, the sun had set, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn of the house she had once considered her sanctuary. As she sat in the darkened living room, surrounded by the trappings of her seemingly perfect life, Octavia felt something inside her break. The pain, the betrayal, the sheer magnitude of the deception. In that moment, a cold resolve began to form in her heart. Someone would have to pay for this betrayal, and Octavia knew exactly who that someone would be. The events leading up to the fatal shooting unfolded over several tense hours on that warm summer evening. Octavia, having spent the day in a haze of grief and anger, found herself pacing the halls of her home like a caged animal. The tick of the clock in the foyer seemed to mock her, counting down the moments until her world would irrevocably change. As dusk fell, Oscar returned home. He entered cautiously, his usual confident stride replaced by hesitant steps. Octavia watched from the shadows of the dining room as he hung up his jacket and loosened his tie, the familiar routine now tainted by the knowledge of his betrayal. Oscar called out Octavia's name, his voice strained with apprehension. When she stepped into the light, he visibly flinched. The woman before him bore little resemblance to the vibrant, loving wife he had known. Octavia's eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, her posture rigid with barely contained fury. Oscar, his face a mask of guilt and desperation, launched into a litany of excuses and apologies. He spoke of feeling neglected, of the pressures of work and their fertility struggles. He claimed the affair had been a mistake, a moment of weakness that had spiraled out of control. With each word, Octavia felt her anger rising, a tide of rage threatening to overwhelm her. Without fully realizing what she was doing, Octavia found herself walking to Oscar's study. She knew he kept a handgun in the desk drawer, a precaution he had insisted on after a series of break-ins in the neighborhood. As if in a trance, she retrieved the weapon, feeling its cold weight in her hand. When she returned to the living room, Oscar's eyes widened in shock and fear. He raised his hands, backing away slowly, his words now coming in a panicked rush. He promised to end the affair, to go to counseling, to do whatever it took to save their marriage. But Octavia barely heard him. In her mind, she saw only images of Oscar and Cordelia together, their betrayal playing on an endless loop. What happened next was a blur of motion and sound. Oscar lunged forward, perhaps trying to disarm her. In that moment of chaos and heightened emotion, Octavia's finger tightened on the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the confines of the room, followed by an eerie silence, broken only by the tinkling of shattered glass from a fallen picture frame. Oscar staggered backward, a look of disbelief on his face as he pressed his hand to his chest. Blood seeped between his fingers, staining his crisp white shirt crimson. He collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, his eyes locked on Octavia's in a silent plea. As the reality of what she had done crashed over her, Octavia dropped the gun. It clattered to the hardwood floor, the sound jolting her out of her shocked state. She rushed to Oscar's side, her anger instantly replaced by horror and regret. She pressed her hands against the wound, desperately trying to stem the flow of blood. Oscar's breathing was labored, his skin growing pale. With trembling hands, Octavia reached for her phone, dialing 911. Her voice shook as she gave the dispatcher their address, pleading for an ambulance to hurry. As she waited for help to arrive, she cradled Oscar's head in her lap, whispering a mixture of apologies and pleas for him to hold on. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. Neighbors, alerted by the gunshot, began to gather outside. Through the window, Octavia could see curious faces peering in, their expressions shifting from concern to shock as they took in the scene. She heard muffled voices, someone shouting about calling the police. When the paramedics finally arrived, they worked swiftly to stabilize Oscar. Octavia watched, numb with shock, as they loaded him onto a stretcher and rushed him to the waiting ambulance. As the sirens faded into the distance, Octavia found herself alone in the house, surrounded by the evidence of her actions. It wasn't long before the police arrived. Detective Mia Davis took charge of the scene, her keen eyes taking in every detail. As officers secured the area and began collecting evidence, Detective Davis approached Octavia, who sat motionless on the blood-stained couch. In a gentle but firm voice, Detective Davis informed Octavia of her rights and asked if she understood what had happened. Octavia, her voice barely audible, recounted the events of the day, the discovery of the affair, the confrontation, and the moment the gun went off. Throughout her statement, she seemed almost detached, as if she were describing something that had happened to someone else. As Octavia was led away in handcuffs, the gravity of the situation began to sink in. She caught glimpses of her neighbors watching from behind hastily drawn curtains, their faces a mix of horror and fascination. At the General Hospital, Oscar Fairweather clung to life in the intensive care unit. The bullet had missed his heart by mere inches, lodging dangerously close to his spine. As he underwent multiple surgeries, a steady stream of colleagues and family friends visited, their hushed conversations in the waiting room filled with speculation and disbelief. Cordelia Prescott, racked with guilt and shame, attempted to visit her son-in-law but was turned away by the Fairweather family. She retreated to her cottage, refusing to answer calls or open her door. The weight of her role in the tragedy seemed to age her overnight, her once vibrant demeanor replaced by a haunted, hollow-eyed look. Detective Davis, meanwhile, delved deeper into the case. She interviewed friends, colleagues, and family members, piecing together the events that had led to that fateful night. The more she uncovered about the Fairweather family's history and the affair between Oscar and Cordelia, the more complex the case became. As the investigation progressed, public opinion in Creekside began to shift. What had initially been seen as a clear-cut case of attempted murder in a fit of rage was revealed to be a tragedy born of betrayal and shattered trust. The town found itself divided, with some sympathizing with Octavia's plight, while others condemned her actions as inexcusable regardless of the circumstances. One of the most crucial pieces of evidence came from an unexpected source. Octavia's best friend and fellow art teacher, Zara, came forward with a series of text messages. In the weeks leading up to the shooting, Octavia had confided her growing suspicions to Zara, detailing the signs of infidelity she had noticed. The messages revealed Octavia's emotional turmoil and her struggle to confront the truth, providing valuable insight into her state of mind. Inside the packed courtroom, the air was thick with tension as the judge called the proceedings to order. The prosecution, led by the ambitious district attorney Vincent Harding, painted a picture of Octavia as a vengeful woman who had committed a premeditated act of violence. Harding argued that the shooting was not a crime of passion, but a calculated attempt to punish both her husband and her mother for their betrayal. Octavia's defense team, headed by the seasoned attorney, presented a different narrative. They portrayed Octavia as a victim of circumstances, a woman pushed to the brink by an unthinkable betrayal. Morales emphasized Octavia's impeccable character, her contributions to the community, and the extreme emotional distress she had been under at the time of the shooting. In their closing arguments, both the prosecution and defense made impassioned pleas to the jury. T.A. Harding emphasized the seriousness of the crime and the need for justice, while Morales urged the jurors to consider the extraordinary circumstances and Octavia's otherwise exemplary life. As the jury filed out to begin their deliberations, a hush fell over the courtroom. The fate of Octavia Fairweather now rested in their hands, and with it, the resolution of a tragedy that had shaken the town of Creekside to its core. After 3 days of intense deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. They found Octavia Fairweather guilty of aggravated assault, a lesser charge than the attempted murder the prosecution had pushed for. The courtroom erupted in a mix of gasps and murmurs as the verdict was read, with Octavia standing stoically beside her attorney. The judge, taking into account Octavia's previously unblemished record and the extraordinary circumstances of the case, sentenced her to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3 years. Additionally, Octavia was mandated to undergo psychological counseling and complete an anger management program. The sentence was met with mixed reactions. Some felt it was too lenient given the severity, while others believed it appropriately balanced justice with compassion. As Octavia was led away from the courtroom, the weight of her actions and the long road ahead seemed to finally settle on her shoulders. Oscar, having recovered from his physical wounds but forever changed by the experience, had moved to a different state to start anew. He and Octavia had divorced during her incarceration, their communication limited to formal letters and occasional phone calls. Despite the pain of their shared past, there was a tentative forgiveness between them, born of mutual understanding and regret. Cordelia had retreated from public life entirely. She lived as a virtual recluse in her cottage, her only contact with the outside world being the occasional visit from a home health aide. The weight of her role in the tragedy had taken a severe toll on her health and spirit. As Creekside slowly heals and life moves forward, the story of Octavia, Oscar, and Cordelia remains a powerful reminder of how quickly and irrevocably lives can change. It challenges us to examine our own relationships, to value the trust placed in us by our loved ones, and to consider the far-reaching impacts of our choices. At the center of this tragic tale were 2 individuals whose paths had crossed years earlier, only to collide again with devastating consequences. David Reeves, a 32-year-old software engineer, and Cassandra Cassie Pitt, a 30-year-old marketing executive, had once been lovers. Their romance, which had burned bright and fierce, ended in heartbreak and resentment. Neither could have imagined that a chance reconnection through a dating app would reignite a spark, not of love, but of deadly obsession. David Reeves was born on a sweltering summer day in 1991. From an early age, it was clear that David was gifted with an exceptional intellect. His parents, both academics at the University of Chicago, nurtured his curiosity and pushed him to excel in his studies. Growing up, David was surrounded by books and intellectual discourse. While this environment fostered his academic growth, it did little to develop his emotional intelligence or social skills. As a child, David often struggled to connect with his peers, finding solace instead in the logical world of mathematics and computer programming. At school, David's brilliance was evident, but so was his inability to navigate social situations. He was often the target of bullies, which only served to deepen his isolation and fuel a simmering resentment towards those he perceived as more socially adept. Despite these challenges, David's academic performance remained stellar, and he graduated as valedictorian of his high school class. David's exceptional grades and test scores earned him a full scholarship to the Institute of Technology, where he pursued a degree in computer science. It was during his college years that David began to come out of his shell, albeit slowly. He joined the robotics club and found a group of like-minded individuals who appreciated his intellect and quirky sense of humor. After graduating from MIT, David landed a prestigious position at a tech startup. His innovative ideas and tireless work ethic quickly propelled him up the corporate ladder. By the age of 28, he was leading his own team of developers, working on projects that promised to revolutionize the field of artificial intelligence. Despite his professional success, David's personal life remained a source of frustration and disappointment. His relationships were few and far between, often ending abruptly due to his intense nature and difficulty in expressing emotions. David's therapist, whom he began seeing in his late 20s, suggested that he might have undiagnosed high-functioning autism, which could explain his social struggles and intense focus on specific interests. As David entered his early 30s, he found himself increasingly lonely and unfulfilled. His parents, now retired and traveling the world, were largely absent from his life. Colleagues admired his brilliance, but kept their distance socially. It was in this state of emotional vulnerability that David would encounter Cassandra Pitt, setting in motion a chain of events that would forever alter the course of both their lives. Cassandra Pitt's story began in the bustling city of Atlanta, Georgia, where she was born in 1993 to Elaine, a high school English teacher, and Desmond, a civil rights attorney. The youngest of 3 children, Cassie grew up in a household that valued education, social justice, and self-expression. From an early age, Cassie exhibited a natural charisma and an ability to connect with people from all walks of life. Her infectious laugh and quick wit made her popular among her peers, while her sharp intellect and curiosity endeared her to her teachers. Cassie's childhood was marked by a sense of adventure and a desire to experience all that life had to offer. Despite her outgoing nature, Cassie harbored a deep-seated insecurity about living up to her family's expectations. Her older siblings, both high achievers in their respective fields of medicine and law, cast long shadows. Cassie's passion for communication led her to pursue a degree in marketing and public relations. College life suited Cassie perfectly, allowing her to expand her horizons and explore new ideas. It was during her junior year that Cassie first began to question her sexuality. A close friendship with her roommate Valerie blossomed into a romantic relationship, leading Cassie to identify as bisexual. While her family was supportive, this period of self-discovery was not without its challenges, as Cassie navigated the complexities of her identity in the face of societal expectations. After graduation, Cassie's drive and talent landed her a position at a prestigious marketing firm in Chicago. She threw herself into her work, quickly gaining a reputation as a creative problem solver and a skilled communicator. Her career flourished, and by the age of 28, she had been promoted to a senior executive position, overseeing major accounts for national brands. As she approached her 30th birthday, Cassie felt a mix of pride in her accomplishments and a gnawing sense that something was missing from her life. It was in this state of introspection that fate would bring David Reeves into her orbit, setting the stage for a relationship that would have far-reaching and ultimately tragic consequences. The paths of David Reeves and Cassandra Pitt first crossed on a chilly October evening at a tech industry networking event in downtown Chicago. David, there to represent his company's latest AI innovations, found himself drawn to the vibrant energy emanating from the marketing corner of the room. It was there that he first laid eyes on Cassie, who was captivating a small crowd with her animated description of a recent successful campaign. Intrigued by her eloquence and charm, David mustered the courage to approach Cassie after her presentation. Their initial conversation was a blend of awkward pauses and unexpected connections. Cassie was impressed by David's depth of knowledge and unique perspectives, while David was captivated by Cassie's ability to make complex concepts accessible and engaging. Exchanging contact information, they parted ways that evening with a sense of potential hanging in the air. Over the next few weeks, their communication evolved from sporadic professional emails to daily text exchanges filled with witty banter and shared interests. Their first date, a visit to the Art Institute of Chicago, was a study in contrasts. David's meticulous analysis of brushstrokes and historical context was balanced by Cassie's emotional responses to the art and her ability to weave narratives around each piece. Despite their different approaches, both found the experience enriching, and the spark between them grew stronger. As their relationship developed, David and Cassie seemed to complement each other in unexpected ways. Cassie drew David out of his shell, encouraging him to experience life beyond the confines of his work and routines. In turn, David's steadiness and intellectual depth provided Cassie with a sense of grounding she hadn't realized she was missing. However, as the initial glow of romance began to fade, the fundamental differences in their personalities became more pronounced. David's need for structure and predictability often clashed with Cassie's spontaneity and social nature. Arguments became more frequent, with David's difficulty in expressing emotions and Cassie's frustration with his perceived emotional distance creating a widening rift between them. The breaking point came 8 months into their relationship when Cassie was offered a promotion that would require extensive travel. David, unable to cope with the idea of long distance and change, retreated into himself. His behavior became increasingly possessive and demanding, attempting to control aspects of Cassie's life in a misguided effort to keep her close. Feeling suffocated and recognizing the unhealthy patterns in their relationship, Cassie made the difficult decision to end things. The breakup was messy and emotionally charged. David, unable to process the rejection, alternated between pleading for another chance and lashing out with hurtful accusations. In the aftermath, Cassie threw herself into her new role, using work as a buffer against the emotional fallout. David, on the other hand, spiraled into a deep depression, his work suffering as he obsessed over what went wrong and how he could win Cassie back. As weeks turned into months, their lives diverged. Cassie began to heal and move forward, while David remained stuck in a loop of anger, self-pity, and fantasies of reconciliation. Neither could have predicted that their paths would cross again, or the tragic consequences that would follow when they did. The 3 years following David and Cassie's breakup saw their lives take dramatically different trajectories. Cassie, embracing her new role and the opportunities it presented, threw herself into her work with renewed vigor. Her career flourished as she spearheaded innovative marketing campaigns that garnered industry recognition. She traveled extensively, broadening her horizons and forging new connections both professionally and personally. During this time, Cassie explored her identity further, engaging in a series of relationships that helped her better understand her needs and desires. She dated both men and women, each experience teaching her more about herself and what she truly wanted in a partner. Through therapy and self-reflection, Cassie worked on setting healthier boundaries and communicating her needs more effectively. David, in stark contrast, struggled to move past the breakup. His work, once his primary source of pride and fulfillment, began to suffer as he grappled with depression and obsessive thoughts about Cassie. Colleagues noticed his declining performance and erratic behavior, leading to a series of warnings from his superiors. In an attempt to fill the void left by Cassie, David tried dating again, but each attempt ended in disappointment. He found himself constantly comparing these women to Cassie, always finding them lacking. His therapist encouraged him to focus on personal growth and healing, but David's sessions often devolved into ruminations about his past relationship and fantasies of reconciliation. As time passed, David's obsession with Cassie didn't wane, but instead took on a darker tone. He began monitoring her social media accounts religiously, creating elaborate stories in his mind about her life and the reasons for their breakup. Unbeknownst to Cassie, David had started driving by her apartment and favorite haunts, always careful to remain undetected. Both David and Cassie continued to live, their paths occasionally crossing at local establishments. These brief, awkward encounters only served to fuel David's obsession and reinforce Cassie's decision to end the relationship. Neither could have foreseen how a simple swipe on a dating app would soon shatter the fragile peace of their separate lives. On a quiet Sunday evening in September, David found himself mindlessly scrolling through a popular dating app. His therapist had suggested he try to meet new people, but David's heart wasn't in it. He was using the app when a familiar face caught his eye. There, smiling back at him from the screen, was Cassie. David's heart raced as he stared at her profile. The photos were recent, showing Cassie at various events and travels. Her bio was witty and confident, highlighting her love for adventure and passion for her work. Without hesitation, David swiped right, his mind already spinning with possibilities. To his shock and elation, it was a match. Cassie had swiped right on him too, though her reasons were far different from David's. For Cassie, seeing David's profile had been a surprise, but she had swiped right out of a mixture of curiosity and a desire for closure. She hoped that enough time had passed for them to have a mature conversation, and perhaps even forge a friendship. David wasted no time in sending a message. "Hey Cassie, long time no see." His casual tone belied the trembling of his hands as he typed. Cassie's response came the next day. "Hi David, this is a surprise. I'm doing well, thanks. How about you?" Their initial exchange was polite but guarded. David, interpreting Cassie's responses through the lens of his fantasies, saw signs of lingering affection where there were none. He quickly steered the conversation towards meeting up, suggesting they grab coffee to catch up properly. Cassie, sensing David's eagerness, felt a twinge of unease. She gently deflected, saying she was busy with work, but suggesting they could chat more on the app for now. Over the next few days, their conversations continued sporadically. David became increasingly bold, reminiscing about their past and hinting at his desire to rekindle their relationship. Cassie, growing uncomfortable with the direction of their chats, decided to be direct. In a carefully worded message, Cassie explained that while she valued the good times they had shared, she wasn't interested in revisiting their romantic relationship. She expressed hope that they could be friends, but made it clear that anything more was off the table. For David, Cassie's rejection was like a physical blow. All the progress he thought he had made in therapy crumbled in an instant. As he read and reread her message, his sadness quickly turned to anger. The old feelings of betrayal and resentment resurfaced with a vengeance, setting in motion a chain of events that would end in tragedy. In the days following Cassie's rejection, David's mental state rapidly deteriorated. The carefully constructed facade of normalcy he had maintained over the past 3 years crumbled, revealing the depths of his obsession and instability. He called in sick to work, isolating himself in his apartment, which quickly became a reflection of his chaotic mind. He created elaborate timelines and conspiracy-style stringboards, trying to piece together the real reason Cassie had rejected him. In his delusional state, David convinced himself that Cassie was being manipulated by others, that she couldn't possibly have rejected him of her own free will. His online behavior became increasingly erratic. David created multiple fake profiles on various social media platforms, using them to interact with Cassie and gather more information about her life. He spent hours analyzing her posts, likes, and comments, looking for hidden messages he believed were meant for him. David's obsession soon spilled over into the physical world. He began following Cassie, carefully documenting her daily routines, the places she frequented, and the people she interacted with. He was meticulous in his stalking, always staying just out of sight, convinced that if he could just understand her life fully, he would find the key to winning her back. As weeks passed, David's grip on reality continued to slip. He stopped attending therapy, convinced that his therapist was part of the conspiracy to keep him and Cassie apart. His personal hygiene and living conditions deteriorated, but he barely noticed, so consumed was he by his obsession. David's work suffered severely. When he did show up at the office, his behavior was erratic and his performance subpar. Concerned colleagues tried to reach out, but David pushed them away, growing paranoid that they too were working against him. It wasn't long before he was called into a meeting with HR and placed on indefinite leave, pending a psychological evaluation. This professional setback only served to fuel David's delusions. With no job to distract him, he devoted all his time and energy to his obsession with Cassie. He convinced himself that if he could just talk to her face to face, he could make her understand that they were meant to be together. David's planning became more sinister. He purchased a gun through an illegal online marketplace, justifying it to himself as protection against the imagined forces keeping him and Cassie apart. He spent hours practicing what he would say to Cassie, rehearsing scenarios that always ended with her realizing her mistake and falling back into his arms. As his mental state deteriorated further, David's fantasies took on a darker tone. He began to entertain thoughts of forcing Cassie to listen to him, of making her understand their connection by any means necessary. The line between love and obsession blurred completely in his mind, replaced by a singular all-consuming need to possess Cassie. On a crisp autumn morning, David woke with a sense of clarity that had eluded him for weeks. He showered, shaved, and dressed with care, as if preparing for a long-awaited date. In his twisted mind, this was to be the day when everything would finally be set right. With the gun tucked into his waistband and a bouquet of roses in his hand, David set out to confront the object of his obsession, oblivious to the tragedy he was about to unleash. The morning of October 15th, Cassie Pitt began her day as she always did, with a brisk jog through the neighborhood, followed by a cup of coffee on her balcony. She had no way of knowing that just a few blocks away, David Reeves was watching her through binoculars, waiting for the right moment to make his move. As Cassie prepared to leave for work, David made his way to her apartment building. His heart raced with anticipation, the weight of the gun at his waist a constant reminder of the power he now held. He positioned himself near the entrance, the bouquet of roses clutched tightly in his trembling hands. When Cassie emerged from the building, David called out her name. She froze, recognizing his voice instantly. As she turned to face him, a mix of surprise and fear flashed across her features. "David, what are you doing here?" David's rehearsed speech abandoned him at the sight of Cassie. Instead, he thrust the roses toward her, his words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "Cassie, please, we need to talk. I know you didn't mean what you said. We belong together." Cassie's initial shock quickly gave way to anger. She took a step back, her voice firm as she replied, "David, I meant every word. You need to leave." But David was beyond reason. He advanced towards Cassie, his free hand reaching for her arm. "You don't understand. They've been lying to you, manipulating you. I'm the only one who truly loves you." Cassie's training in self-defense kicked in. She twisted away from David's grasp, her voice rising as she shouted for help and calling the police. The mention of the police shattered the last of David's delusions. In a fluid motion born of desperation, he pulled the gun from his waistband. The roses fell forgotten to the ground as he leveled the weapon at Cassie. Cassie's eyes widened in terror at the sight of the gun. She raised her hands in a placating gesture, her voice shaking as she tried to reason with him. For a moment, David hesitated. A flicker of doubt crossed his face as he stared into Cassie's pleading eyes. But then he caught sight of her phone in her hand, the screen showing a half-dialed 911 call. Something snapped inside him. What happened next was a blur of motion and sound. David lunged forward, grabbing for the phone. Cassie resisted, struggling to break free. In the scuffle, a shot rang out, echoing through the quiet morning air. Time seemed to stand still as Cassie stumbled backward, a look of shock and disbelief on her face. She looked down at the spreading red stain on her blouse. David stood frozen, the gun still clutched in his shaking hand. The reality of what he had done crashed over him like a tidal wave. As Cassie collapsed to the ground, neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the sound of the gunshot. David, panicking, turned and fled, leaving behind the woman he claimed to love bleeding on the sidewalk. In the distance, sirens began to wail, growing louder with each passing second. But for Cassie, lying on the cold concrete, those sirens would come too late. The tranquil morning was shattered by the arrival of police cars and ambulances, their sirens piercing the air as they converged on Cassie's house. Detective Eliana Vasquez, a veteran of the police department's homicide unit, arrived on the scene within minutes of the first 911 call. As paramedics fought to save Cassie's life, Detective Vasquez began the painstaking process of piecing together the events of the morning. She cordoned off the area, preserving the crime scene for the forensics team. The discarded roses, the shell casing from the fired bullet, and the blood-stained concrete all told a partial story of the tragedy that had unfolded. Witnesses were quickly identified and separated for interviews. A resident of the building had been watering her plants on her balcony when she heard the commotion. She described seeing a man matching David's description fleeing the scene, providing the first solid lead in the case. As the forensics team combed the area for evidence, Detective Vasquez turned her attention to Cassie's background. A preliminary search of Cassie's phone, retrieved from the scene, revealed the recent interactions with David on the dating app. This discovery quickly established David as the prime suspect. The investigation expanded rapidly. Detectives were dispatched to David's apartment and workplace, while others began the process of tracing his movements in the days leading up to the shooting. His recent leave of absence from work and erratic behavior painted a picture of a man unraveling. Interviews with Cassie's friends and colleagues revealed the history between her and David, shedding light on the toxic nature of their past relationship and David's inability to move on. Each new piece of information added to the growing profile of David as a dangerous and unstable individual. The search for David quickly escalated into an intense manhunt. As dawn broke on the second day after the shooting, law enforcement agencies from across the state joined the effort, transforming the quiet suburb into a hive of police activity. As the manhunt entered its third day, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A homeless man reported seeing someone matching David's description entering an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The tip was initially met with skepticism, but given the lack of other leads, Detective Vasquez decided to pursue it. A tactical team was assembled, and in the early hours of the morning they moved in on the warehouse. The tension was palpable as they methodically cleared the building, the silence broken only by the crackle of their radios and the echo of their footsteps on the concrete floor. In a dramatic turn of events, David was found, barely recognizable from the man in the widely circulated photos. Disheveled, malnourished, and clearly in a state of mental distress, he offered no resistance as he was taken into custody. Detective Vasquez, bleary-eyed but determined, conducted the initial interrogation. David, still in a state of shock, alternated between periods of eerie calm and emotional outbursts. His ramblings about conspiracies and his delusional belief that he and Cassie were meant to be together painted a disturbing picture of his mental state. Within hours of his arrest, David was assigned a public defender. She immediately requested a psychological evaluation, setting the stage for what would become a central issue in the case: David's mental competency to stand trial. As the legal proceedings unfolded, a team of forensic psychiatrists began the arduous task of evaluating David's mental state. Their findings would be crucial in determining whether he would face trial or be remanded to a psychiatric facility. Meanwhile, the prosecution meticulously gathered evidence from David's apartment, including the walls covered with photos and timelines of Cassie's life. His internet search history revealed a disturbing pattern of stalking behavior and research on untraceable weapons. Pre-trial motions flew back and forth. The defense sought to suppress evidence from David's apartment, arguing it was obtained without proper warrant. The prosecution fought to include David's dating app conversations with Cassie as evidence of premeditation. The verdict in the trial of David Reeves sent shockwaves through the community. Found guilty of first-degree murder but mentally ill, David was sentenced to life in a high-security psychiatric facility, with the possibility of transfer to prison if his mental state improved. In the wake of the trial, the community struggled to heal. The case had exposed the vulnerabilities that existed even in their seemingly idyllic suburb, leading to increased awareness about stalking and domestic violence. At the heart of this idyllic community stood the Lawrence residence. For years, it had been a symbol of stability and refinement in Stonebridge. The Lawrence sisters, Isolde and Celeste, were fixtures of the neighborhood, known for their grace, intelligence, and the unshakable bond they shared. Isolde, the elder by 2 years, was a poised and ambitious corporate lawyer with sharp features and an even sharper wit. Her sister Celeste, a free-spirited artist, balanced Isolde's intensity with her easy charm and infectious laughter. Together, they were a formidable pair, admired and envied in equal measure by those around them. But the delicate equilibrium of Stonebridge was destined to be shattered by the arrival of one man, Alaric Thorne. With his enigmatic smile and air of worldly sophistication, Alaric moved into the long-vacant Holloway house next door to the Lawrences on a balmy June evening. Little did the residents of Stonebridge know that his presence would set in motion a chain of events that would culminate in tragedy, forever altering the fabric of their peaceful community. As the summer heat intensified, so too did the rivalry between Isolde and Celeste, their once unbreakable sisterly bond corroding under the acid of jealousy and desire. What began as playful competition would soon spiral into a deadly game, with Alaric as the unwitting prize and Stonebridge as the stage for a chilling tale of betrayal. The Lawrence family had deep roots in Stonebridge, tracing back 4 generations to the town's founding. The parents had raised their daughters, Isolde and Celeste, with a blend of old-money refinement and new-age philosophies, resulting in 2 remarkably different, yet equally captivating young women. Isolde Lawrence seemed destined for greatness from her first breath. With her father's sharp intellect and her mother's unyielding determination, Isolde excelled in everything she pursued. By the age of 32, she had already made partner at Stonebridge's most prestigious law firm, her name whispered with a mixture of admiration and trepidation in courtrooms across the state. Isolde's life was a carefully constructed edifice of achievements and accolades. Her wardrobe consisted of impeccably tailored suits. Her social calendar was filled with charity galas and networking events, and her romantic entanglements were as brief as they were calculated. To the outside world, Isolde Lawrence was the very picture of success, but those closest to her sensed an underlying current of discontent, a hunger that no professional triumph seemed able to satisfy. In contrast, Celeste Lawrence burst into the world on a midsummer's night, her arrival heralded by a spectacular thunderstorm. From childhood, Celeste possessed an ethereal quality that drew people to her like moths to a flame. Her laughter could lighten the heaviest of hearts, and her art, vibrant, emotive paintings that seemed to capture the very essence of joy, adorned galleries throughout the region. At 30, Celeste's life was a kaleidoscope of color and sensation. She flitted from one passion project to another, leaving a trail of half-finished masterpieces and broken hearts in her wake. Where Isolde was all sharp angles and cool precision, Celeste was soft curves and warm impulse. Her bohemian style and carefree attitude were at odds with Stonebridge's conservative leanings, yet somehow she made it work, charming even the most curmudgeonly of neighbors with her genuine warmth and infectious enthusiasm. Despite their differences, or perhaps because of them, Isolde and Celeste had always been inseparable. They balanced each other, Isolde providing the stability and focus that Celeste sometimes lacked, while Celeste brought a spark of spontaneity to Isolde's regimented existence. Their sisterly bond seemed unbreakable, a fact that made the events to come all the more shocking to those who knew them. As children, they had been co-conspirators in backyard adventures and shared confidants in teenage trials. As adults, they remained each other's fiercest defenders and most trusted allies. Neither sister could have imagined that anything, or anyone, could ever come between them. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The arrival of Alaric Thorne in Stonebridge was like a stone cast into still waters, sending ripples of curiosity and excitement through the community. He appeared one day in early June, driving a sleek black Audi that purred down Maple Street with feline grace. As he emerged from the car, the Neighborhood Watch, a group of retirees who spent their days cataloging the comings and goings of Stonebridge from their porch swings, leaned forward in unison, eager for a glimpse of their new neighbor. Alaric did not disappoint. At 35, he cut a striking figure. There was something almost cinematic about his presence, as if he had stepped out of a noir film and into the technicolor world of Stonebridge. Rumors about Alaric's past spread through the community like wildfire. Some said he was a tech millionaire, taking a sabbatical from Silicon Valley. Others whispered that he was a novelist, seeking inspiration for his next bestseller. The truth, as it turned out, was equally intriguing. Alaric Thorne was a former war correspondent turned humanitarian aid worker who had spent the last decade hopscotching across global hotspots. Stonebridge, he claimed, was to be his refuge, a place to heal and write his memoirs. The Lawrence sisters first encountered Alaric separately, each meeting leaving an indelible impression. Isolde, out for her morning run, nearly collided with him as he emerged from the local coffee shop. Their eyes met over the rim of his steaming cup, and for a moment, Isolde felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with physical exertion. Celeste's introduction came later that same day, as she was setting up her easel in the park. Alaric, out exploring his new surroundings, stopped to admire her work. His insightful comments on her use of color left Celeste both flattered and intrigued. Either sister realized, as they recounted their encounters over dinner that night, that they had just met the man who would change their lives forever. The seeds of rivalry between Isolde and Celeste were planted innocuously enough, nurtured by the subtle competition that had always existed between them. At first, their growing interest in Alaric manifested in small ways. Isolde began taking her morning runs past his house with increasing frequency, while Celeste found reasons to paint in the park near his regular walking route. As summer progressed, both sisters found themselves unconsciously vying for Alaric's attention. Isolde, typically reserved in social situations, made an effort to engage Alaric in intellectual discourse whenever they crossed paths. She regaled him with tales of her most challenging cases, her gray eyes alight with passion as she detailed the intricacies of corporate law. Alaric, to her delight, proved to be an attentive and insightful listener, often drawing parallels between her legal battles and the geopolitical conflicts he had witnessed. Celeste, meanwhile, approached Alaric with her characteristic warmth and spontaneity. She invited him to local art exhibitions, introducing him to Stonebridge's small but vibrant creative community. On lazy Sunday afternoons, she would often spot him reading on his porch and would bound over, sketchbook in hand, to share her latest inspiration or to cajole him into being her impromptu model. Alaric, for his part, seemed to genuinely enjoy the company of both sisters, oblivious to the growing tension between them. He found in Isolde a kindred intellectual spirit, someone who could match his wit and challenge his perspectives. With Celeste, he rediscovered a sense of joy and wonder that years of witnessing human suffering had nearly extinguished. The rivalry might have remained friendly, a mere undercurrent in the sisters' relationship, had it not been for the annual Stonebridge Summer Gala. The event, a black tie affair held at the town's historic mansion, was the social highlight of the season. Isolde and Celeste had always attended together, a united front amidst Stonebridge's elite. This year, however, each sister extended a separate invitation to Alaric. When Alaric arrived at the gala, looking dashing in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, the Lawrence sisters' faces fell in unison. He greeted them both warmly, seemingly unaware of the silent battle of wills taking place before him. As the evening progressed, Isolde and Celeste took turns monopolizing Alaric's attention, each trying to outshine the other. Isolde dazzled him with her knowledge of wine, guiding him through a tasting with the expertise of a seasoned sommelier. Not to be outdone, Celeste swept Alaric onto the dance floor, her natural grace making even his awkward steps seem charming. By the end of the night, a palpable tension had settled between the sisters. As they watched Alaric drive away, each lost in their own thoughts, they realized that something fundamental had shifted in their relationship. The easy camaraderie they had always shared was now tinged with an edge of competition, a silent acknowledgement that they had become rivals in the pursuit of Alaric Thorne's affections. As summer gave way to autumn, the rivalry between Isolde and Celeste intensified, their every interaction with Alaric becoming a calculated move in an increasingly complex game. The sisters, once inseparable, now found reasons to spend time apart, each hoping to encounter Alaric alone. Isolde, ever the strategist, began orchestrating chance meetings with Alaric. She adjusted her schedule to coincide with his daily routines, casually bumping into him at the local farmer's market or the quaint bookstore on Main Street. During these encounters, she would engage him in deep conversations about his experiences in war-torn countries, drawing parallels to her own battles in the courtroom. Isolde's keen intellect and sophisticated charms seemed to resonate with Alaric, and she reveled in the moments when his eyes would light up with interest at her insights. Celeste, intuiting her sister's maneuverings countered with her own brand of seduction, she invited Alaric to impromptu picnics in the park, her basket filled with homemade delicacies that showcased her culinary skills. Under the dappled shade of oak trees, she would regale him with vivid stories of her travels through Europe's art scenes, her animated gestures and melodious laughter a stark contrast to Isolde's reserved demeanor. Celeste's free spirit and zest for life seemed to awaken something in Alaric, a yearning for the simple joys he had forgone in his years of global wandering. The competition between the sisters began to spill over into other aspects of their lives. Isolde, who had always been career-focused, suddenly took an interest in community events, volunteering for the same charitable causes that Alaric supported. Celeste, typically content with her bohemian lifestyle, started talking about getting her art into more prestigious galleries, knowing that Alaric appreciated ambition. Their friends and neighbors in Stonebridge watched this transformation with a mixture of fascination and concern. The once harmonious Lawrence sisters were now prone to thinly veiled barbs and one-upmanship, their interactions charged with an undercurrent of rivalry that was impossible to ignore. The situation came to a head at the Stonebridge Autumn Festival. Both sisters had been involved in organizing the event, each hoping to impress Alaric with their community spirit. Isolde had meticulously planned the logistics, ensuring every detail was perfect. Celeste had taken charge of the artistic elements, designing beautiful decorations that transformed the town square into a harvest wonderland. As Alaric strolled through the festival, complimenting both sisters on their hard work, Isolde and Celeste flanked him on either side, each vying for his attention. When he admired a particularly striking centerpiece, Celeste quickly claimed credit, shooting a triumphant glance at Isolde. In retaliation, Isolde smoothly steered the conversation towards the event's flawless execution, subtly highlighting her own contributions. The tension between them built throughout the evening, culminating in a heated argument behind the catering tent. Their raised voices drew concerned looks from passers-by, and even Alaric, finally noticing the strain between the sisters, attempted to intervene. His presence only served to fuel their anger, each accusing the other of trying to monopolize his time. As the festival wound down, Isolde and Celeste departed separately, their usual joint ride home abandoned. Alaric was left standing alone, a puzzled expression on his face, as he began to realize the depth of the conflict he had inadvertently sparked between the Lawrence sisters. The watershed moment in the sisters' rivalry came on a crisp October evening, during Stonebridge's annual charity auction. The event, held in the grand ballroom of the Stonebridge Country Club, was a glittering affair that drew the town's most prominent citizens. Isolde and Celeste arrived separately, each a vision in designer evening wear, their eyes scanning the crowd for a glimpse of Alaric. When Alaric finally appeared, looking debonair in a classic black tuxedo, both sisters made their move. They converged on him from opposite sides of the room, their forced smiles barely concealing their competitive intent. Alaric, now acutely aware of the tension between them, attempted to greet both equally, but the atmosphere was charged with unspoken hostility. As the auction began, Isolde and Celeste found themselves locked in a silent bidding war. The item up for bid was a weekend getaway for two at an exclusive mountain resort, an opportunity that both sisters saw as a chance to spend uninterrupted time with Alaric. The bidding started reasonably, but quickly escalated as Isolde and Celeste raised their paddles with increasing frequency. The other attendees watched in astonishment as the price soared well beyond the package's value. Alaric, realizing the bid was more about him than the prize, tried to intervene, but his protests fell on deaf ears. The sisters were too engrossed in their competition to heed his discomfort. In the end, it was Celeste who won the bid, her final offer eliciting a collective gasp from the crowd. As the auctioneer's gavel fell, Celeste turned to Isolde with a triumphant smirk, only to find her sister's face a mask of cold fury. Isolde, typically the picture of composure, was visibly shaking with rage. In that moment, something shifted in Isolde's eyes, a hardening, a darkness that sent a chill down Celeste's spine. Without a word, Isolde turned on her heel and strode out of the ballroom, leaving a wake of whispers in her path. Alaric, witnessing this exchange, finally grasped the full extent of the sisters' rivalry. He approached Celeste, his face etched with concern, and gently suggested that perhaps it would be best if he kept his distance from both of them for a while. Celeste, her victory suddenly hollow, could only nod mutely as she watched him walk away. As the evening drew to a close, the residents of Stonebridge buzzed with speculation about the Lawrence sisters' very public falling out. Little did they know that this was merely the prelude to a much darker chapter in the sisters' story. In the days following the charity auction, Isolde retreated into herself, her usual routines abandoned in favor of long hours spent alone in her home office. To the outside world, it appeared that she was merely nursing her wounded pride, but within the confines of her mind, a sinister plan was taking shape. Isolde had always prided herself on her self-control, her ability to compartmentalize emotions and approach problems with cool logic. But the humiliation of losing to Celeste, coupled with the fear of losing Alaric, had cracked her carefully constructed facade. For the first time in her life, Isolde found herself entertaining thoughts that both thrilled and terrified her. At first, these thoughts were relatively innocuous, fantasies of Celeste falling ill or encountering some minor misfortune that would keep her away from Alaric. But as the days wore on, fueled by sleepless nights and an increasing sense of desperation, Isolde's imagination took a darker turn. She began to contemplate scenarios in which Celeste was permanently removed from the equation. These thoughts, initially shocking in their intensity, gradually became more palatable as Isolde's mind worked to justify them. She convinced herself that Celeste had always been the favored sister, the one who effortlessly captured attention and affection, while Isolde had to work tirelessly for every scrap of recognition. In her distorted reasoning, Isolde began to see Celeste not just as a rival for Alaric's affections, but as the embodiment of everything she had ever resented in life. Every setback, every disappointment, every moment of self-doubt, Isolde now attributed them all to Celeste's mere existence. The turning point came on a rain-soaked evening, as Isolde sat in her darkened living room, a glass of wine in hand. Through the window, she caught sight of Celeste and Alaric, sharing an umbrella as they walked down the street, their heads bent close in intimate conversation. Something snapped inside Isolde at that moment. The last vestiges of sisterly affection crumbled away, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. It was then that the idea of an accident first took root in Isolde's mind, an unfortunate incident that would rid her of Celeste once and for all, leaving the path to Alaric clear. As lightning illuminated the room, Isolde allowed herself a small, chilling smile. She was, after all, an expert in constructing airtight cases. Surely she could craft the perfect crime. With the decision made, Isolde threw herself into planning with the same meticulous attention to detail that had made her such a formidable lawyer. She approached the task of eliminating her sister with the clinical detachment of a chess player, plotting several moves ahead. Her first step was to establish an alibi. Isolde began to cultivate a more visible presence in the community, volunteering at the local animal shelter and joining a book club. She made a point of being seen and heard, creating a network of witnesses who could vouch for her whereabouts and character. Simultaneously, she embarked on a careful study of Celeste's routines. Under the guise of reconciliation, Isolde began to spend more time with her sister, noting her habits, her schedule, and most importantly, her vulnerabilities. She paid particular attention to Celeste's daily jog through Stonebridge Park, a solitary ritual that Celeste had maintained for years. Isolde's research extended beyond her sister. She spent hours poring over medical journals and forensic reports, learning about accidents that could appear natural, yet be orchestrated. She became an expert in the effects of various substances, their detectability, and their ability to mimic natural causes of death. To cover her tracks, Isolde used public computers at the local library to conduct her more questionable searches, always careful to clear the browsing history afterward. She made discreet purchases from different stores across town, accumulating the materials she would need without raising suspicion. As her plan crystallized, Isolde encountered several close calls that threatened to derail her scheme. Once, while she was mixing a concoction in her garage, a neighbor dropped by unexpectedly. Isolde managed to conceal her work just in time, her heart pounding as she chatted casually over coffee. Another time, Celeste nearly discovered a notebook where Isolde had jotted down some incriminating notes. Isolde managed to snatch it away, passing it off as a draft for a sensitive legal case. The incident served as a stark reminder of the need for absolute caution. Despite these near misses, Isolde's resolve never wavered. If anything, the close calls only served to sharpen her focus and refine her plan. She became adept at maintaining a facade of normalcy, playing the role of the dutiful sister and respected community member while secretly orchestrating Celeste's demise. As weeks turned into months, Isolde's plan evolved into an intricately woven tapestry of deception and calculation. Every detail was accounted for, every possibility considered and recalculated. In her mind, it was no longer a question of if she would act, but when. The opportunity Isolde had been waiting for finally presented itself on the eve of Stonebridge's annual marathon, an event in which Celeste had enthusiastically participated for years. With a sense of grim satisfaction, Isolde realized that the stage was set for her carefully choreographed accident to unfold. The morning of the Stonebridge Marathon dawned bright and clear, a perfect day for running. Isolde awoke early, her nerves humming with a mixture of anticipation and dread. She went through her morning routine with mechanical precision, each action carefully planned to establish her alibi. At 7:30 a.m., Isolde arrived at the marathon starting line, clipboard in hand. She had volunteered as a race coordinator months ago, securing herself a visible role in the day's events. She greeted fellow volunteers with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, her gaze constantly scanning the growing crowd for a glimpse of Celeste. Celeste arrived at 8:15 a.m. She waved enthusiastically at Isolde, any lingering tension between them seemingly forgotten in the pre-race atmosphere. Isolde waved back, her stomach churning as she thought of what was to come. As Celeste warmed up, Isolde made her way to the water station at the 5-mile mark, where she had been assigned to distribute refreshments to the runners. This position was crucial to her plan. It allowed her to be seen by numerous witnesses, while still giving her access to the race route. The starting gun fired at 9 a.m. sharp. Isolde watched the sea of runners surge forward, her eyes fixed on Celeste's retreating form. Then, with a deep breath, she turned her attention to her duties, handing out cups of water with mechanical efficiency. At 9:47 a.m., Isolde excused herself, citing a need for a bathroom break. Instead, she hurried to a secluded spot along the race route, just before a sharp turn that led into a wooded area. Here, she retrieved a small vial from her pocket and carefully spread its contents, a nearly invisible, highly slippery substance, across a patch of the path. Returning to her post, Isolde resumed her role, her heart racing as she awaited Celeste's approach. At 10:23 a.m., she spotted her sister rounding the bend towards the water station. Celeste was making good time, her face set in determination as she reached for a cup. Their eyes met for a brief moment, as Isolde handed Celeste the water. In that instant, a flicker of doubt passed through Isolde's mind, a last vestige of sisterly affection crying out in protest. But it was too late to turn back now. Celeste continued on, oblivious to what lay ahead. Isolde watched, her breath caught in her throat as her sister approached the treacherous patch of ground. Time seemed to slow as Celeste's foot made contact with the slippery surface. The accident unfolded exactly as Isolde had planned. Celeste's foot slid, her ankle twisting at an unnatural angle. Her momentum carried her forward, sending her careening off the path and down a steep embankment. The sound of breaking branches and a muffled cry echoed through the woods, followed by an ominous silence. For a moment, Isolde stood frozen, the reality of what she had done crashing over her. Then, snapping back to her senses, she raised the alarm, her anguished cries for help convincingly real. As fellow volunteers and paramedics rushed to the scene, Isolde played the part of the distraught sister to perfection, her eyes brimming with tears that were not entirely feigned. As Celeste's motionless form was carefully lifted onto a stretcher, Isolde felt a strange mix of horror and relief. The deed was done. Now, all that remained was to see her plan through to its bitter end. The news of Celeste Lawrence's tragic accident sent shockwaves through Stonebridge. The vibrant artist, beloved by many, had suffered severe head trauma and multiple fractures in her fall. She lingered in a coma for 3 days before succumbing to her injuries, leaving the community in mourning and disbelief. The initial investigation into Celeste's death was cursory. Given the public nature of the event and the presence of numerous witnesses, the police were inclined to view it as a tragic accident. Isolde's performance as the grief-stricken sister was flawless, her composed exterior cracking just enough to reveal glimpses of raw emotion that seemed genuine to all who saw her. In the days following Celeste's funeral, a somber affair attended by what seemed like the entire town, Isolde threw herself into managing her sister's estate. She handled the tasks with her usual efficiency, all the while playing the role of the bereaved sibling to perfection. The first thread in Isolde's carefully woven tapestry of deception came loose 6 months after Celeste's death. Amelia Thornton, a junior associate at Isolde's law firm, was tasked with organizing old case files when she stumbled upon a peculiar notebook hidden among Isolde's papers. Curiosity piqued, Amelia flipped through the pages, her eyes widening as she realized the sinister nature of its contents. The notebook contained detailed notes on various poisons and their effects, along with what appeared to be a meticulously planned timeline. While no names were mentioned, the final date corresponded chillingly with the day of Celeste's fatal accident. Unsure of what to do with this information, Amelia confided in her boyfriend, Detective Lucas Reeves. Reeves, a by-the-book officer who had always felt uneasy about the quick resolution of Celeste's case, saw this as an opportunity to reopen the investigation. He began by quietly re-examining the evidence, paying particular attention to details that had been overlooked in the initial inquiry. A breakthrough came when Reeves interviewed Martin Holloway, a retired chemist who lived near the accident site. Holloway recalled seeing Isolde near the wooded area shortly before Celeste's fall, despite Isolde's insistence that she had been at the water station the entire time. This discrepancy, coupled with the suspicious notebook, was enough for Reeves to dig deeper. As the investigation progressed, more inconsistencies in Isolde's story came to light. Security camera footage from a nearby convenience store showed Isolde purchasing unusual combinations of chemicals in the weeks leading up to the marathon. A forensic re-examination of Celeste's running shoes revealed traces of an artificial polymer designed to reduce friction, a substance that had no business being on a running trail. Perhaps the most damning piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Alaric Thorne, racked with guilt over his role in the sisters' rivalry, came forward with a series of text messages from Isolde. The messages, sent in the heat of their competition for his affections, revealed a level of animosity towards Celeste that bordered on obsession. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, the true picture of what had transpired on that fateful day began to emerge. Isolde's carefully constructed alibi began to crumble under the weight of mounting evidence. The final nail in the coffin came during a search of Isolde's home office. Hidden behind a false panel in her desk, detectives discovered a vial containing traces of the same polymer found on Celeste's shoes, along with a series of detailed notes outlining the plan to stage an accident during the marathon. Faced with the overwhelming evidence against her, Isolde's composure finally shattered. In a moment of desperation, she attempted to flee, leading police on a tense car chase through the streets of Stonebridge. The pursuit ended at the very spot where Celeste had fallen, with Isolde's car skidding off the road in a cruel twist of irony. As she was led away in handcuffs, the mask of the grieving sister fell away completely. The residents of Stonebridge watched in shock as Isolde Lawrence, once a pillar of their community, was revealed to be the architect of her own sister's demise. The arrest and subsequent confession of Isolde Lawrence sent shockwaves through Stonebridge, shattering the town's idyllic image and forcing its residents to confront the darkness that had lurked beneath the surface of their community. The courtroom drama unfolded like a twisted mirror image of Isolde's legal career, with the once respected lawyer now sitting at the defendant's table. Her impassioned plea of temporary insanity, citing the extreme emotional stress of her rivalry with Celeste, fell on deaf ears. The jury, comprised of many who had once admired her, took less than a day to return a guilty verdict. She was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole.